A memory of an incident from several years earlier came to mind. It was the time when dungeons had first appeared in Japan and were named the Rift of Babel. People from all over the world had gathered in the country in search of wealth and fame. Among them was the protagonist, Toyama Naruhito, who was widely known as the Explorer. During one of his expeditions, Toyama found himself standing in a frozen wasteland before a gigantic, one-eyed monster. Without hesitation, he took out a piece of equipment and prepared to defeat the creature, astonishing those who were watching. He remarked that their opponent was right in front of them before launching an attack on the beast. He reflected that he worked in an industry where death was commonplace, and that was why being called a veteran did not seem unusual. Even so, he understood that the day would eventually come when his own life would reach its end. After fighting through countless monkey-like monsters, Toyama was left standing alone with a fatal wound in his chest. Looking around, he wondered how many monsters he had killed and whether any of them had managed to escape. His thoughts then drifted to a dream he had always cherished, building a home beside a peaceful lake. Taking another step forward, he remarked that his remaining strength only needed to carry him a little farther. He then found himself wondering how those monkey-like monsters must have felt during the battle. At that moment, Toyama realized that he was truly finished and that death was rapidly approaching. Toyama had been sitting in the sauna before even the birds were awake, later cooling himself off in a nearby lake. He dreamed of owning a bakery that served elegant, freshly baked bread and of building a house of his own. As he reflected on his life, he thought that he should not have tried so hard to act cool. After building his dream house, he had planned to raise a dog. He had considered getting a Shiba Inu, though any breed would have been fine as long as it was large and fluffy. He had also hoped to spend time drinking with good friends and simply enjoy a peaceful life. Unfortunately, he realized that he would never be able to do any of those things. After walking forward for a while, he suddenly collapsed. As he fell, he thought that he did not want to die inside a dungeon. He had finally become a senior explorer, and life had only just started to become exciting. There was still so much he wanted to experience. Over the years, he had grown accustomed to the work. He no longer cared much about disposing of monsters and had even become used to the sweet scent of their blue blood. He had trained relentlessly and mastered efficient methods of killing. Although gathering materials sometimes caused him trouble, he had never neglected his preparations. He had never overestimated himself and had always chosen to retreat when survival demanded it. He had slain countless monsters, sold their materials for money, and claimed numerous treasures along the way. Everything he had done was meant to turn his dreams into reality and allow him to live life on his own terms. Yet now, as death approached, he found himself strangely at peace. Somehow, he felt that it was all right if his journey ended here. After all, he had become an explorer in pursuit of his dreams and had lived exactly the kind of life he had wanted. Toyama remembered that he had only recently begun to enjoy his life. Things had finally started getting better, but in the end, once a person died, everything was over. He wondered if this was truly the end. As his consciousness faded, memories flashed through his mind. He recalled the countless requests he had accepted and the many times he had risked his life to protect his comrades. He questioned whether having comrades had been the right choice or whether becoming an explorer had been a mistake from the very beginning. Despite those doubts, a smile remained on his face. He reflected that fighting, hunting monsters, earning money, and enjoying delicious food had been incredibly fun. If he ever got another chance, he promised himself that he would not make the same mistakes. He would stop holding back and give everything he had. He even thought that he would use all of his trump cards without hesitation. Suddenly, he noticed the ground beneath him beginning to liquefy. As his body slowly sank into it, he felt certain that he was a dead man. Just then, a voice came through his transmitter, catching him completely by surprise. The caller informed him that they had successfully met up with the Self-Defense Force rescue team and that everyone was safe. The person added that it was all thanks to Toyama that they had managed to escape alive. All that remained was for Toyama himself to make it back so that the story could have a happy ending. Toyama recognized the voice as Hatamura's. He told him that he did not have much time left and needed a favor. Hatamura immediately replied that he would do whatever Toyama asked. Toyama then requested that Hatamura access his special folder in the Heart Tribe database and delete everything related to the silver-haired elves and the air-headed vampires. After hearing the request, Hatamura understood exactly what Toyama meant and shouted at him not to say such things, refusing to accept that he was giving up. However, Toyama calmly replied that everything would be fine. His comrades had survived, and that alone was enough for him. He asked them to take care of the life he could no longer live and concluded that, considering everyone had made it out safely, he could count the situation as his victory. As the mud slowly swallowed him, Toyama found himself smiling. He felt strangely happy and reflected that he had truly enjoyed his life. He thought that if he were ever given another chance, he would do even better. He dreamed of earning enough money to build a house, open a shop, and explore everything the world had to offer. He imagined going on adventures, enjoying delicious food, becoming wealthy, starting a family, and raising a dog. With those thoughts in mind, Toyama gradually disappeared beneath the mud. Meanwhile, the rescue team rushed to the last location from which his terminal had transmitted a signal. Unfortunately, they were unable to find any trace of Toyama's body. Later, the Explorer Association organized a large-scale search operation, but no evidence of his survival was ever discovered. To the world, Toyama Naruhito had simply vanished. Toyama himself felt certain that he had died. However, in the darkness, he suddenly heard a voice. Moments later, he realized that he was being lifted by an enormous hand. The mysterious being thanked him for providing entertainment within its miniature garden and remarked that Toyama had possessed the potential to become one of its darlings. The being explained that Toyama was not the same as its previous darlings, yet there had been similarities. His greed, determination, and instinct for survival had been admirable. Unfortunately, those qualities no longer mattered, as Toyama was already dead. The place where he stood was described as the graveyard of the being's former darlings and the final destination of Toyama's journey. Yet the being questioned whether Toyama truly wished for everything to end there. Before Toyama could respond, the voice declared that it would allow him to continue. Although that place was not meant for him, he had somehow arrived there. Fortunately, there was another perfect world where he could begin anew. The being admitted that it was looking forward to seeing where Toyama's experiences and future journey would lead, no matter how long it took. As a parting gift, the being granted Toyama a special blessing. It explained that this gift would make his new life easier and that a guidance arrow would always assist him in finding the correct path. And so, Toyama's modern dungeon life in a vast new world was about to begin. He was transported to a completely different world while carrying the mysterious gift known as the guidance arrow. Sometime later, Toyama slowly regained consciousness. When he opened his eyes, he discovered that his hands were bound. Sitting upright, he immediately noticed a glowing arrow floating nearby, which left him thoroughly confused. As he followed the direction indicated by the arrow, he saw a lizardman staring at him. The creature remarked that Toyama had finally awakened. Toyama's confusion only deepened. Not only had he awakened in an unfamiliar world while restrained, but the strange arrow also appeared to be pointing directly at the lizardman. The lizardman looked at Toyama and wondered whether he had also been caught while trying to pass through a town checkpoint. He explained that the same thing had happened to him and that they were now being transported elsewhere. According to him, they would most likely be sold as adventurer slaves, meaning that both of them had run out of luck. Toyama was still trying to understand the situation when his stomach suddenly growled. Hearing this, the lizardman offered him some bread that he had baked himself. Toyama was confused by the offer, especially since a strange floating arrow appeared before him. The arrow displayed a quest that instructed him to speak with the Lizardian slave. The lizardman apologized and assumed that Toyama would not want to eat something made by a Lizardian. However, Toyama immediately accepted the bread and replied that he would gladly eat it if it was being offered. The lizardman seemed genuinely surprised that Toyama was willing to eat it. Toyama wondered whether he was not supposed to, but after taking a bite, he found the bread surprisingly delicious. Seeing Toyama enjoy the bread made the Lizardian happy, and at that moment, the mysterious arrow finally disappeared. Toyama then turned his attention to the handcuffs around his wrists. Before he could think further, a guard suddenly shouted at both him and the Lizardian, referring to them as slaves and ordering them to stay quiet. The Lizardian remarked that some therianthropes possessed exceptionally sharp hearing and could easily overhear conversations. Toyama casually commented that the entire situation felt like the setting of a strange dream. The Lizardian replied that he was not sure whether it was a dream or reality, but he was grateful to have finally met someone decent to talk to. However, Toyama disagreed and told him that the truly good person was the Lizardian himself, as he had kindly shared his bread with a complete stranger. Sometime later, the carriage finally came to a halt. The Lizardian nervously noted that therianthropes were known for their short tempers and worried that they might have come to kill them. When the prisoners were ordered out of the carriage, Toyama immediately noticed several girls with cat ears nearby. At that moment, he became even more convinced that he was trapped inside an incredibly realistic dream. As they were escorted forward, Toyama continued looking around with curiosity. Suddenly, while staring at the cat-eared girls, he accidentally bumped into a massive wolf therianthrope walking on two legs. The wolf became furious and brutally punched Toyama in the face. He then mocked him, declaring that a lowly slave should know his place and keep his eyes to himself. The heavy blow sent Toyama stumbling backward, making it painfully clear that this world was far more dangerous than he had initially assumed. The other wolves burst into laughter after seeing Toyama get punched. Toyama thought that even the pain felt completely real, and he figured things would become troublesome if they provoked him a few more times. The Lizardian quickly checked on him and asked if he was all right. He explained that this was the kind of treatment adventurer slaves usually received. Toyama asked whether adventurers were the people associated with guilds. The Lizardian confirmed that they were. He explained that slaves like them belonged to those adventurers and were often used as mine canaries, sent into dangerous places first to test for traps and hazards. Toyama remarked that this dream was becoming surprisingly detailed. The Lizardian replied that he was prepared for whatever awaited him and intended to hold on to the good memories he had made. Nearby, the wolves were discussing another matter. One of them complained that they could not allow the dragon priestess to keep causing trouble, while another reminded everyone not to forget the upcoming inspection. The wolves eventually turned their attention back to the prisoners. One of them approached the Lizardian and questioned whether he was hiding something. The wolf remarked that the Lizardian had managed to slip past the captain's inspection, which was not bad for a thief. The wolves then noticed the bread and wondered if the Lizardian had been planning to eat it in secret. The Lizardian immediately denied the accusation, explaining that he simply did not want anyone to go hungry. As one of the wolves reached for the bread, the others began laughing. They crushed it underfoot and declared that someone like him deserved to starve rather than eat bread made by a Lizardian. The wolves continued mocking him, calling the Lizardians a cursed race known only for invading, plundering, and stealing. They ridiculed the idea that someone from such a race would dare bake bread, claiming that it was disgusting. After the wolves finished trampling it, Toyama calmly walked over, picked up the ruined bread, brushed off the dirt, and started eating it. He remarked that it still tasted incredibly good. Sitting beside the Lizardian, he asked whether there was any more bread. The Lizardian apologetically replied that it had been the last piece. Toyama told him that if he baked more in the future, he would gladly pay for it. Then, Toyama slowly stood up. As he did, he noticed several arrows appearing above the wolves' heads. The Lizardian looked at him in confusion, unable to understand what he was seeing. Toyama quietly remarked that this was already the third time those people had gotten on his nerves. He reflected that they were the worst kind of trash. People who wasted food and trampled on the hard work of others. As an explorer, Toyama had always followed his desires. He had decided long ago that he would live greedily and honestly, pursuing whatever he wanted without regret. Even if this world turned out to be a dream, he had no intention of compromising with people who angered him. One of the wolves mockingly challenged Toyama, asking whether he intended to hit him. Toyama casually replied that the wolf should take a bath because he smelled terrible. The insult instantly enraged the wolf, who charged toward him. However, Toyama remained calm. As the wolf attacked, Toyama judged his movements to be extremely amateurish. At the last moment, he thrust 2 fingers directly toward the wolf's eyes. The sudden counterattack left everyone stunned. The wolf dropped his weapon in shock, unable to understand what had happened. Toyama casually kicked the fallen weapon aside and declared that he had finished dealing with one of them. Before the second wolf could fully comprehend the situation, Toyama had already moved. Moments later, the second wolf was on the ground as well, defeated just as easily as the first. After that, Toyama looked at the third individual and wondered whether he was the one who had slashed his stomach and struck Lizardian earlier. As the wolf rushed toward him with a sword, Toyama blocked the attack and countered by stabbing the monster with his own weapon. In the end, he defeated the enemy and glanced at the imaginary screen, which informed him that he had completed an optional objective. Toyama found the feature extremely useful. Lizardian was amazed by what he had witnessed. Although Toyama wanted to check his injuries, he realized that it was not the right time to do so. As the two prepared to leave, Toyama suddenly heard numerous lizards, wolves, and members of other races declaring that they would kill him. He referred to them as the gray goblins that had finally begun to react. Lizardian became worried, but Toyama told him not to be concerned because he no longer intended to hold back. He then released smoke that quickly spread throughout the area, leaving everyone confused about the strange smell and the mysterious fog surrounding them. Even though they were inside the Hell Tower, they were still only on the first floor. While Lizardian stood beside him, Toyama urged him to hurry and began pulling him along. Lizardian anxiously asked what the fog was. Toyama explained that it was created by his allies and added that if Lizardian wanted to eliminate those people, they first needed to become a little more excited and agitated. Toyama then addressed the slaves, telling them that if they wished to escape, now was their chance, as he was leaving as well. The slaves were shocked upon hearing this. Eventually, Trek's efforts paid off, and Toyama and Lizardian managed to make their way out. As they moved forward, Lizardian wondered whether Toyama could actually see where they were going. Tuyama replied that he could not, but for some reason he was able to see an arrow that functioned like a game marker. He found it incredibly user-friendly and helpful. However, while they continued advancing, they suddenly reached a slippery area, causing both of them to lose their footing and slide away. The scene then shifted to a completely different location, where a man approached a woman who was seated while holding her staff. As he arrived, he informed her that the time had finally come. A maid standing nearby added that the armor cleaning preparations had also been completed. Upon hearing this, the woman rose to her feet and remarked that everything had been unbearably boring. She went on to say that since the boredom seemed destined to continue endlessly, perhaps she should spend some time praying to the angels for someone to appear and put an end to her monotony. Tuyama found himself dreaming of a strange scene. In the dream, a dog was telling a cat that Tuyama did not even have a house and that they were both in the same situation. Meanwhile, Tuyama asked the dog whether it was doing all right. Back in reality, Lizardian was watching over the unconscious Tuyama. As he listened to Tuyama's breathing, he wondered whether Tuyama could even understand him. Feeling guilty, he apologized for everything that had happened and urged Tuyama to wake up. After all, the two of them had fallen into a mysterious place after slipping from above. Eventually, Tuyama opened his eyes. However, waking up only left him even more confused, as he could not tell whether he had truly awakened or was simply trapped in another dream. Lizardian told him to pull himself together, explaining that he was the one Lizardian had to rely on. Tuyama agreed and asked if something was wrong. At that moment, both of them heard a loud noise. When they turned toward its source, Tuyama discovered a gigantic cyclops. At the same time, a quest appeared before him, instructing him to survive the encounter. As usual, an arrow pointed toward his objective. As the cyclops let out a terrifying growl, Tuyama remarked that it certainly did not look friendly. Lizardian was visibly frightened. The moment the giant attacked, Tuyama pushed Lizardian aside and narrowly dodged the blow himself. Despite the danger, he burst into laughter and pointed out that a single hit from the monster would be enough to kill both of them instantly. Lizardian was baffled and asked why Tuyama was laughing in such a situation. Tuyama replied that although the creature was terrifying, the situation was also incredibly exciting. Even the Cyclops seemed confused by his reaction. Tuyama then regretted throwing away his axe earlier. As the giant charged toward him once more, Tuyama continued laughing and called it a fool. Suddenly, a man appeared out of nowhere. Using his staff, he struck the Cyclops with overwhelming force and asked Tuyama whether he was foolishly seeking death. The giant was defeated instantly. Afterward, the man casually remarked that it had been boring and that the Cyclops was not even strong enough to serve as proper entertainment. Tuyama was stunned by the display of power. Lizardian commented that even experienced adventurers would struggle against such a monster. When the armored figure landed before them, Lizardian's shock only grew stronger. The man asked whether they belonged to one of the Lizardian tribes, noting that such tribes still seemed to exist. Trembling with fear, Lizardian referred to him as a dragon and stated that he must possess an incredibly pure and powerful bloodline. The man calmly agreed. While Lizardian continued praising him, the dragon turned his attention to Tuyama and remarked that he did not seem very promising. He even questioned whether Tuyama had a death wish. Lizardian immediately bowed before the dragon. When Tuyama remained standing, Lizardian hurriedly urged him to bow as well. However, Tuyama could not help wondering why the man was acting so arrogantly. Lizardian desperately explained that the dragon came from the Empire and was a tower-class adventurer, an existence that had already taken half a step beyond the world's natural laws. The dragon told him not to praise him so excessively, though he admitted that hearing it was not entirely unpleasant. He then turned back to Tuyama and stated that Tuyama possessed the ancient saint's blessing. Whatever power that was, it had allowed him to break free from the shackles imposed on adventurers. Although Tuyama thanked him for the information, he was more concerned about the overwhelming pressure the dragon emitted. The man's presence felt more like that of a monster than a human. The dragon then remarked that the higher floors of the tower should be becoming interesting by now. Tuyama remained confused and wondered whether everything happening around him was some kind of dream. Lizardian, meanwhile, grew increasingly frustrated with Tuyama's constant confusion. Suddenly, Tuyama felt a terrible sense of unease. The dragon asked whether they would like some entertainment to help pass the time. He claimed to have plenty of games they could play. The game he proposed was simple, yet horrifying. Tuyama and Lizardian would kill one another, and the sole survivor would earn freedom from slavery and be allowed to leave the tower alive. To prove his sincerity, he swore upon the name of the hoarding dragon. Lizardian was stunned by what he had heard. The man remarked that he was not going to repeat himself and that they should not pretend they had failed to hear him. He added that they must be the type of people who needed to see the reward with their own eyes before believing it. He then told Lizardian to remove his shroud and revealed a repatriation seal from the church. Possessing such a seal was enough to grant a slave immediate freedom, allow them to leave the tower alive, and even secure employment in the city of adventure. For slaves, it was an unimaginably valuable reward, something they would be willing to give anything for. However, the man explained that there was a condition. He wanted Toyama and Lizardian to fight each other, and the one who survived would receive the seal. Confused, Toyama turned to Lizardian and asked what was happening. The man then threw a weapon toward Lizardian, commenting that a proper fight to the death required proper weapons. He added that since Toyama had a knife, it was only fair for Lizardian to have a weapon as well. Lizardian was shocked when he recognized the weapon. It was the dragon's knife. The man urged them to entertain him by fighting to the death. He declared that they should struggle, kill one another, and dance for his amusement. Otherwise, Lizardian would have no chance of surviving. Somehow, Toyama seemed to understand what Lizardian was trying to do and slowly moved a short distance away. Toyama could hardly tell whether he was dreaming or not, but he had been given a quest: slay the lizard slave if he wished to survive. Meanwhile, the man sat back and watched, eager to enjoy the spectacle. He ordered them to begin the match, warning that if neither of them was willing to act, he would have no choice but to kill them both himself. Therefore, he advised them to choose the path that offered the greatest chance of survival. Toyama hesitated. He remembered that Lizardian had shared his bread with him because he did not want anyone to go hungry. For that reason, Toyama could not bring himself to kill him. At that moment, Lizardian spoke about his dream. He said that he had always wanted to open a small shop beside a lake. It did not need to be large. He simply wanted a trustworthy friend to help him run it. Regular customers would come by every day to eat his bread, and that alone would have made him happy. He reflected that this had always been his dream, and thanks to the dragon, it had finally come true. For the first time in his life, someone had eaten the bread he had baked and sincerely praised it for being delicious. Although Lizardian did not want to die, his dream had already been fulfilled, and that brought him a sense of satisfaction. He felt deeply ashamed for having briefly considered killing Toyama in order to survive. At that point, he no longer cared what happened to him. Lizardian silently thanked the dragon for its guidance and for the encounter that had led him there. Toyama was a good man, someone who had eaten the bread made by a lizard slave and had even become angry at those who treated Lizardian so cruelly. As Lizardian lowered his head before the dragon leapt down from above and called him a boring person. He remarked that the desire to live possessed by mortal creatures was something even higher species envied, yet Lizardian had cast it aside of his own accord. The dragon admitted that this made him somewhat speechless. He then declared that the entertainment was over. The ending had been dull and far less exciting than he had hoped. With that, he tossed the pendant toward Toyama and instructed him to hold it in his hand while chanting the dragon's name, adding that any living creature in the world should be capable of doing so. The dragon further stated that a dragon never broke its word. However, the outcome had been even more boring and disappointing than he had imagined. Turning his gaze toward the golden armorer, he asked what he intended to do with Lizardian. Toyama was thrilled by those words. The man replied that it had already been decided that only one of the two would survive. Since the outcome of the match had been so dull, he ordered Toyama to leave and claim his freedom. Lizardian's death would be the price for Toyama's survival. However, instead of obeying, Toyama suddenly laughed. His reaction immediately wounded the man's pride. Narrowing his eyes, he wondered whether Toyama had truly dared to laugh at his words. Toyama felt an emotion far stronger than the fear he had experienced when he had discovered the enormous mansion within the dungeon or when he had faced the giant spider there. Without hesitation, he walked over to Lizardian. Lizardian clasped his hands together and urged Toyama to leave as quickly as possible before something unexpected happened to him. Toyama told him not to talk like that. He pointed out that he did not even know Lizardian's name yet. The words caught Lizardian by surprise. At a time when his life was hanging by a thread, Toyama was concerned about something as simple as his name. Yet Toyama's expression remained completely serious as he stood before him. Lizardian became emotional as he introduced himself. He revealed that Lazar was his family name and that his full name was Lizardian Lazar. However, most people knew him by the degrading title of Filthy Lizardian Traveler. Toyama then introduced himself in return. He jokingly described himself as an explorer suffering from a slight case of dungeon sickness. Afterward, he asked Lizardian to hold the pendant for a moment. As Lazar grasped the pendant, Toyama suggested that he use its power. He remarked that Lizardian's dream and determination had been genuinely moving, and that it was a story worth admiring. A moment later, something changed within Lazar. He suddenly realized that he had become the one chosen to survive. As he tried to protest and tell Toyama to stop, Toyama interrupted him and said that Lazar should leave first. Toyama then turned his attention toward the dragon. He declared that everything should end there and that things should have been settled that way from the very beginning. At that moment, the arrow shifted and pointed toward the dragon instead. Seeing this, Toyama became convinced that the arrow had been meant to point at the dragon from the start. At the same time, Toyama received a notification informing him that the story was collapsing because the main quest had been abandoned. Toyama assumed that the man standing before him was now destined to die. However, a new notification suddenly appeared. A hidden quest had been triggered. The dragon rose to his feet once more and declared that he would kill Toyama for daring to anger him. He furiously referred to Toyama as an insolent and unpleasant slave. Toyama calmly told him not to speak so quickly. He stated that he was finally about to reveal what he was truly capable of, and that, from that moment onward, he intended to follow his own desires, without hesitation. The man appeared genuinely enraged and remarked that he would give Toyama some credit, as it had been a long time since anyone had irritated him to such an extent. Toyama cracked his neck excitedly and replied that there was no reason to get so upset. He pointed out that the man had seemed to be enjoying himself only moments earlier and noted that they were actually quite similar. However, Toyama added that he was nothing like the dangerously serious individual standing before him. In his eyes, the man was exactly the kind of monster he had been appointed as an explorer to hunt. The other man looked confused, and Toyama responded that, at the very least, the man seemed ready for what was coming. The man then declared that his words were absolute and that only one of them would leave the battlefield alive. Toyama calmly replied that there were only the two of them left there, and he would be the one to survive. Upon hearing this, the man burst into savage laughter. Suddenly, his expression darkened with rage as he raised his weapon. Toyama observed the aura surrounding it and wondered whether it was fire. However, he quickly realized that it was merely a strange weapon that heeded whatever it struck. Toyama remained completely calm, which seemed to concern the man. The man commented that Toyama was no longer a boring opponent. As the man prepared to charge forward and attack, Toyama remarked that the man was actually the prey between the two of them. Toyama recalled that in the year 2028, dungeons had begun appearing across Earth. These realms defied the laws of physics and mocked the foundations of science itself. Within them existed objects capable of warping the laws of the world. Humanity had classified these objects into three categories: artifacts, relics, and finally, remembrances. At that moment, Toyama caught a familiar scent and immediately understood what it was. Using the power of a remembrance, he dispersed the surrounding smoke. With all the necessary conditions finally met, Toyama activated the haze blade and launched an attack. The dragon-like man blocked it effortlessly. Toyama commented that the man's position had actually saved him, as he had been standing downwind. By that point, the effect of Toyama's blade had already spread across a radius of 50 meters. Toyama continued by explaining that no one truly understood how it worked. The haze blade simply scattered countless tiny blades into the air, so small that they were practically invisible. Although the dragon-like man possessed incredibly heavy armor, Toyama knew that armor could not stop the air itself. Suddenly, the dragon man felt an intense wave of pain coursing through his body. Toyama laughed and remarked that this was exactly why he loved hunting monsters. After a while, the dragon man fell to his knees. He grudgingly praised the quality of his armor, believing it had protected him. However, Toyama suddenly felt something was wrong and dropped to one knee as well. Trying to remain calm, he commented that it was a mystery why the recoil was making him feel sick. Nevertheless, he considered it a worthwhile trade-off, as going all out from the very beginning had clearly been the right decision. At that moment, he realized that everything happening before him was real and not some dream. Soon afterward, Toyama noticed that the arrow was still lodged in the dragon man's body. The man defiantly shouted that Toyama should not look down on him. A moment later, enormous wings burst from his back. Rising to his feet, he proudly declared that he was a dragon. Toyama, however, remained completely calm as the man staggered nearby. He reminded the dragon man that he had already explained how the invisible blades had been scattered throughout the air. Mixed with every breath the man took, those microscopic blades had entered his body and were now cutting him apart from the inside. The dragon man was clearly suffering, yet he admitted that Toyama's technique was truly splendid for someone with a finite lifespan. Without hesitation, Toyama then commanded the haze blade to finish them both. Somehow, Toyama realized that the dragon was incredibly persistent. Although he might not have looked like it, he was actually a rather courteous person. If he did not make absolutely certain that his opponent was dead, he would not be able to sleep peacefully at night. His gaze then fell upon a fine knife. He remarked that it originally belonged to the dragon and that he was merely returning it to its owner. With that, he drove the blade into the dragon's body. After a while, Toyama noticed that the arrow was still embedded in the fallen dragon. The hunt was finally over, and the dragon had been slain. As the battle concluded, Toyama began to examine the rewards he had obtained from defeating the armored dragon. He had unlocked the anti-dragon attack skill, and the haze blade had absorbed the soul of the hoarding dragon. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to the outside of Yahello Tower, located within the Adventurers Guild of the Imperial Territory of Agatra. There, the territory's ruler, Margrave Sapan von Teach, appeared deeply troubled. He muttered that something like this should never have happened during his watch, yet somehow it had. The thought alone filled him with anxiety. As he worried, a woman approached him and remarked that he had been making quite a commotion for some time. Margrave immediately recognized her as Marie, the guildmaster, and commented that her impeccable timing was his favorite thing about her. However, as he moved closer, Marie suddenly struck him and apologized, explaining that it had happened so suddenly that she had been unable to stop herself. Margrave rubbed the spot where he had been hit and remarked that it had been a rather impressive chop. Marie then brought up the blacklist, stating that she intended to record Margrave's testimony. She added that it was probably too late to point out how suspiciously strange his behavior had been. Suddenly, Margrave pointed toward the triage lamp. Its surface had begun to melt. Observing the phenomenon, Marie recalled that the dragon priest known as the Hoarding Dragon's Flame of Life should have been ranked number 7. Margrave nodded while sipping his tea and confirmed that there had indeed been a reaction. As they both considered the implications, a horrifying possibility crossed their minds. If the dragon was truly dead, it would be a disaster. Margrave nearly burst into tears. The dragon had served as one of the guardians of the Empire, a higher life form whose existence was invaluable. Among all the Empire's important figures, dragons were considered the highest-ranking VIPs. Marie then stated that, according to the records of the Dragon Embassy, the Hoarding Dragon had been scheduled to conduct a hunt within Yahello Tower on that very day. Margrave stated that they were required to report even a single candle going out, as it signified the life or death of a Tower-class adventurer. Such incidents had to be reported to the capital immediately. Seeing him panic, Marie grabbed him from behind to restrain him. After releasing him, she asked whether he had finally calmed down and suggested that they begin by assessing the situation and planning an appropriate response. Margrave agreed, but looked confused, wondering if she had simply been ignoring everything he had said. Marie proposed issuing a formal request to first-class adventurers or even stronger tower-class adventurers to search for the Hoarding Dragon. Margrave agreed with the idea, but suddenly collapsed onto the floor. He groaned that the king had probably already noticed the extinguished candle and that they would also have to report the matter to the Dragon Embassy. Marie asked whether this was not the first recorded dragon death in nearly 200 years. She then explained that during the Great War, the Mage Academy had once managed to kill a flame dragon. However, after being resurrected, the same flame dragon had burned its progenitor, the omniscient dragon, as well as the academy itself. It would have been one thing if dragons only had a single life, but they were practically immortal beings. Margrave wondered whether they should immediately notify the various regions and begin preparations for the Empire's Dragon Festival. He reasoned that before the Dragon Embassy issued any orders, it would be better to present it as a grand welcome celebration from the city. After all, that individual would probably be returning soon. Marie commented that she liked that expression on Margrave's face. It seemed that he could never truly give his all unless he was cornered. Margrave finally understood what needed to be done. There was only one course of action left. Filled with determination, he began stretching and warming up, declaring that nothing was more troublesome than the death of a dragon. Marie then revealed that there was at least one piece of good news. An 8th-hour class adventurer was currently waiting for Margrave on the underground level. Curious, Margrave asked who it was. Marie replied that it almost seemed like fate. The person happened to be searching for a dead dragon as well. That adventurer was none other than Wenfil Barna, the former archer of the hero's party. The moment Margrave heard that name, he visibly trembled because to him, that girl was trouble incarnate. It was revealed that the symbol of harmony between the Empire and the Dragon Realm was the Dragon Priestess, known as the Hoarding Dragon. One of her 7 lives had been extinguished by an unknown predator. To mourn her death and celebrate the promise of her eventual resurrection, a proposal was made across the Empire for the first time in 200 years to hold a grand dragon festival. By imperial decree, the celebration was approved without consulting the Parliament of Nobility. As a result, the Empire's economy began booming almost immediately. Merchants, adventurers, brothels, and countless other industries benefited from the Dragon Festival, while the death and future resurrection of the Dragon Priestess further stimulated the nation's economy. Meanwhile, in the Hell Tower located within the adventurer city of Agatra's first stratum, a woman leaped into a chamber near a glowing waterfall. There rested the body of the dragon, over which ladies stood watch. As she observed the scene, she found herself overwhelmed by boredom. Everything felt simple, predictable, and meaningless. There was nothing left in the world capable of threatening her, making life dull and devoid of excitement. Her thoughts drifted to the past when a familiar individual had approached her. The man, who had once served as her waiter, remarked that she was as magnificent as ever and praised her ability to strike accurately even while blindfolded. Upon removing the blindfold from her eyes, she recognized him immediately. However, Lady appeared displeased by his presence. She remarked that one fairy tale had just come to an end, and that another story, similar to those her mother used to tell her, had also reached its conclusion. She had once believed that life was meant to be enjoyable, and that the world was filled with treasures worth seeking, hoarding, and obtaining. She had believed that such rewards could only be earned through struggle and by overcoming hardships, lessons both her father and mother had taught her. Unfortunately, reality had proven to be far different from what she had been led to believe. The man responded by saying that her father had been the iron-blooded dragon while her mother had been the blossoming dragon. Given their wishes for her, they had undoubtedly wanted her to enjoy the world and all it had to offer. He pointed out that she was still very young and wondered whether it was not a little too early for her to arrive at such a conclusion. Lady, however, appeared deeply disappointed. She remarked that her mother had often said similar things, yet nothing in the world brought her joy anymore. She admitted that she sometimes wished she had remained ignorant of the true nature of fairy tales and of the frailty of humans who, in the end, revealed nothing but their fear of her. She reflected that it would have been better if she had simply admired them from afar. After all, the human world had ultimately proven to be no different from the timeless and deathless dragon realm. Everything had become stagnant and predictable. As a result, she could not see any way to escape the overwhelming boredom that consumed her. Lady reflected on the various groups that existed in the world and found them all equally boring. She regarded the church as tedious, while the knights were nothing more than weaklings who devoted themselves entirely to worshipping her. In her eyes, they were no different from the dragon cult of the kingdom. Among those around her, there was also the money-obsessed merchant woman who owned numerous shops. However, Lady knew that this woman would never oppose her, making her no source of interest either. As for the omniscient dragon, who lived among humans in the form of a human being, Lady considered that possibility entirely out of the question. Her thoughts then turned toward adventurers and heroes. Heroes, after all, only appeared during humanity's darkest crises in response to desperate prayers. This led her to wonder whether she should simply destroy the entire world herself and force such a crisis into existence. The old man immediately objected, insisting that she should not resort to something so extreme. In response, Lady asked whether he intended to crush the boredom that plagued her. The old man denied it, explaining that only a human could fill the emptiness within her heart. Lady found the suggestion difficult to accept. In her experience, humans were all the same. They constantly spoke pleasant words and offered shallow compliments, yet their hearts never truly supported those sentiments. What disgusted her most was the gap between their words and their true feelings. At that moment, she suddenly heard Sorth's voice reporting that the knight had been killed by a dragon. The news immediately caught her attention and stirred a rare sense of excitement within her. Deciding that there was finally something worth investigating, she concluded that it was time to return home. The scene then shifted back to the present. Lady calmly seated herself upon her throne and instructed the old man to find the black-haired human slave. Lady declared that the black-haired slave was the one responsible for her death. She announced that unless he was found, the dragon realm would sever all ties with the empire forever. However, she also proclaimed that if someone managed to locate and bring him before her, the pact between the dragon realm and the empire would endure for eternity. As an additional reward, whoever found him would receive her entire hoard. The hoarding dragon's decree caused the empire's economy to surge even further. It seemed that even a dragon's death could generate immense profit for everyone involved. Despite the massive search effort, Tuyama had yet to be found. Curious about the progress, Lady asked the old man how many cases had been reported so far. He replied that there had been 12 suspects brought in by the church knights and 4 groups that had presented imposters claiming to be the dragon slayer. Lady dismissed the matter as nothing more than a useful thinning of the herd. At the very least, it helped eliminate the unworthy. She noted that her dragon slayer was proving to be an excellent hider. Nevertheless, she believed that the one destined for her could not evade fate forever. The scene then shifted to the present, where Tuyama stood before her. Gazing at him, Lady declared that he would become her hoard. This moment brought the story back to an earlier event. After defeating the dragon, Tuyama had received a mysterious prompt instructing him to loot the corpse. Completely confused, he had no idea what he was supposed to do. Before touching anything, Toyama sat down, clasped his hands together, and offered a prayer for the fallen dragon. He reflected that he might be able to defeat the next one he encountered as well. At the same time, he silently prayed that the dragon would never be reincarnated again. Afterward, he examined the battlefield. A large black spear lay nearby, along with a cloak, a set of shining golden armor, and a helmet that had been left behind. While searching the remains, Toyama also discovered several personal belongings, including identification tags that appeared to belong to the fallen individual. He carefully gathered all the equipment and valuables for himself. Not far away was a lake where several crocodiles watched him silently from the water, observing his every movement. After collecting all the equipment and valuables, Toyama stood up and reflected on the battle. He admitted that his opponent had been incredibly powerful, but also far too unstable. Fortunately, the enemy had underestimated him and become careless, never realizing that Toyama possessed several trump cards that allowed him to fight without fear. Those hidden advantages were the very reason he had managed to survive. According to what he knew, all he needed to do was hold the pendant and say his name to escape. However, as he looked back on the battle, he realized that this had been the first time he had ever killed another person. The feeling was strange, as though he had crossed an invisible line. Even so, he concluded that it was not much different from slaying monsters. Toyama recalled reading about the modern dungeon rift phenomenon known as rebel, which was said to intoxicate the human mind. The phenomenon affected the amygdala and neural synapses, distorting morality and unraveling self-control. It was one of the reasons ordinary humans could eventually transform into explorers. Looking back, Toyama believed that his 3 years of experience as an explorer had undoubtedly altered his own mindset as well. His attention then shifted to the pendant. Wondering whether it truly belonged to Jim, he reasoned that if the pendant was genuine, its owner should still be alive somewhere. Grabbing it tightly, Toyama repeatedly spoke the name, hoping it would activate. However, nothing happened. He tried again and again, but the pendant remained completely unresponsive, leaving him increasingly frustrated. Before he could investigate further, several reptilian monsters emerged nearby. Toyama stared at them in confusion as they aggressively approached him. The creatures appeared unusually excited, producing strange noises as they closed in. It did not take long for him to realize that they had been attracted by the scent of blood. Trying to avoid a fight, Toyama pointed toward the dragon's corpse and attempted to redirect them toward the freshly dead meat. Unfortunately, the creatures ignored the offering completely and continued chasing him. With no other option, Toyama fled for his life. The monsters were both faster and more numerous than he had expected. Realizing he could not outrun them forever, Toyama prepared to use the haze blade. The technique generated an incredibly dense mist that would blind both the enemy and himself. At the same time, he called upon the guiding arrows for assistance. Suddenly, a side quest titled Nostalgic Reunion appeared before him. A glowing arrow materialized and began pointing toward a specific direction. Even while following the arrow, Toyama continued dodging and counterattacking the crocodile-like monsters. As he fought, he observed that the creatures did not seem to rely heavily on sight or hearing. This led him to suspect that they might be detecting heat in a manner similar to snakes. Preparing to unleash the Mistblade and eliminate the entire pack, Toyama suddenly realized something and immediately canceled the attack. He instinctively shouted a warning, telling everyone nearby to keep their heads down and lie flat on the ground. At that exact moment, a female archer appeared. She calmly reported that she had received a positive response from the local native and immediately activated her Hawkeye skill along with her wind authority. Running a rapid combat efficiency analysis, she calculated the optimal elimination pattern before drawing her specialized M66 parasitic bow, codenamed Mars. After confirming the target, she gave the engagement signal and released her arrows. Each shot struck with incredible precision, instantly eliminating the pursuing crocodile monsters. Toyama watched in astonishment, completely amazed by her overwhelming skill. The archer then confirmed that the target's response matched her expectations and adjusted her combat calculations accordingly. Despite her confidence in her abilities, she remained cautious and avoided becoming overconfident. Nevertheless, she acknowledged that her current pairing with her partner gave them a significant advantage. Once the battle ended, Wenfilbarna approached Toyama and asked whether he had been injured. She remarked that he seemed extraordinarily lucky to have survived. Toyama remained confused by her sudden appearance, while Phil herself appeared equally puzzled. After observing his black hair and brown eyes, she asked whether he was Japanese. When Toyama confirmed that he was, Phil immediately reported a negative result to someone through her communication device. Her expression became noticeably concerned as she continued analyzing the situation. Finally, she told Toyama to remain calm and hold on, assuring him that she currently had control of the situation. After reminding herself of a few things, the woman remarked that it had been a long time since they had met. Toyama was immediately confused and wondered who she was talking about. The woman explained that, from her perspective, it was a reunion with Kazi. However, she acknowledged that for Toyama it was their first meeting. She added that the tower was a fascinating place, a true nexus where countless timelines and locations were thrown together into a chaotic mixture. Although Toyama thanked her for saving him, he still wanted to know who she really was. The woman replied that there was much to explain and apologized for the confusion before introducing herself once more. Still unsatisfied, Toyama asked again for her identity. Finally, the woman introduced herself as Wenfil Barna Gilvansofluil Tusk, though she stated that she was currently traveling and preferred to be regarded simply as a traveler. Toyama found the introduction baffling. Noticing his reaction, Wen commented that the expression on his face was quite rare. She remarked that Kaze rarely displayed such a human-like expression and admitted that, considering Toyama's situation, his confusion was completely understandable. Despite her calm demeanor, Toyama remained cautious. Sensing this, Wen assured him that there was no need to be on guard and advised him to put away his dangerous weapons. Toyama became even more suspicious. Not only did she know his name, but she also seemed to know things about him that she should not. Wondering what she truly was, he pressed her for answers. To his surprise, Wen replied that she was his future nemesis. The answer only confused Toyama further. Ignoring his bewilderment, Wen turned toward Mars and asked whether it would mind staying nearby while she spoke with Toyama. She then suggested moving elsewhere, explaining that there was a camp nearby where Kazi and the others were staying. She offered to take Toyama there as well. Toyama immediately asked what would happen if he refused the invitation. After considering his reaction, Wen remarked that she now had a better understanding of what kind of person Toyama was. Instead of forcing him to listen, she decided that it would be more effective to show him the benefits first. If he accepted the invitation, she promised that she would explain his situation properly. She also mentioned that there would be some exceptionally delicious tea waiting for him. The mention of delicious tea was enough to convince Toyama. He accepted the invitation and the group eventually arrived at the camp. A short while later, Toyama found himself seated with Wen while enjoying a cup of tea. As they relaxed, he wondered what he should call her. Wen suggested that he simply call her Wen. She added that she would rather not hear her full name spoken by Toyama. This response left Toyama puzzled, causing him to wonder whether she hated him for some reason. Wen replied that Toyama happened to be one of the people whom Kazi disliked. She then jokingly suggested another nickname involving a damn elf and asked what he thought about it. Toyama had absolutely no idea what she was talking about. Seeing his confusion, Wen admitted that he was the last person she had expected to hear such words from. Deciding to move on, she steered the conversation back to the main issue. She explained that Toyama was indeed alive and that, unfortunately for him, none of this was a dream. It was an undeniable reality. Although Toyama was surprised by the revelation, he could not help commenting on how delicious the tea was. Wen sighed and asked him to stop trying to escape reality. She explained that he truly had come from the other side. Furthermore, the fact that Mars had shown no reaction confirmed what she had suspected all along, that Toyama was Japanese. Toyama readily admitted that he was a completely ordinary Japanese man. Hearing that, Wen remarked that she never would have imagined ending up sharing tea with someone like Toyama. The situation felt almost unbelievable to her. Still struggling to process everything, Toyama once again asked whether he was really alive. Wen confirmed that he was. She explained that the world around him was not a dying illusion created by his brain, nor was it some final dream before death. It was unquestionably real. More importantly, she revealed that this place was an entirely different world, completely separate from the Japan that Toyama had once known. When Philbarna continued, saying that it must have been quite a shock, since everything had happened so suddenly. However, Toyama was surprisingly excited and wondered whether he had been reincarnated into another world. He remarked that he had actually received the trendy 2020s style isekai reincarnation treatment. When Philbarna replied that Kaze had not expected such a reaction and that Toyama seemed far too pleased about the situation. Toyama admitted that he was excited, but she told him to be quiet, commenting that he was surprisingly amusing and that he might have gotten along well with Kaze. Toyama was thrilled that he was still alive and that he had apparently ended up in an isekai world. He wondered whether all the adventurers, the lizard man, the beastmen he had defeated, and the old winged armored man were inhabitants of that world. As Toyama stepped closer to Wenfil Barna in his excitement, she stopped him and asked him to step back, saying that he was far too dramatic to deal with. Toyama became even more excited, exclaiming that it was finally happening and that he had finally found his guide. He asked whether his arrival had been a transfer or a reincarnation. explaining that he wanted clarity on that point because confusion often led to all kinds of problems. Wenfilbarna sighed and wondered whether this was what the database meant by an otaku. Toyama turned toward her and explained that he had never been able to indulge in that kind of stuff as a child, which was why he was acting this way now. Looking at his annoyed expression, she remarked that he was truly funny and wondered what exactly he had just said. Toyama immediately insisted that he was not an otaku. Wenfilbarna then brought up the lizard man and the winged armored figure. She said she could understand him referring to the dragon, but she questioned how he even knew Lazar's name. Toyama explained that they had both been in the same slave wagon. He then stated that he wanted answers regarding her connection to the adventurers and the armored man. She commented that Toyama seemed to have a split personality because he could switch moods so quickly. Afterward, she revealed that Toyama would not be able to kill Kaze with the haze blade, at least not in his current weakened state. She also told him to calm down, reminding him that Kaze had never been close friends with the armored freak or the adventurers Toyama had killed. Wenfilbarna reminded him that he was confused, and then spoke about both the reason Kaze had won and the reason he had ultimately lost. However, she admitted that certain details still did not add up, especially considering that Lazar had been a slave and that Toyama had also been present. Toyama confessed that there was simply too much information that only she seemed to know. Nevertheless, there was one thing he was certain of. She already knew a great deal about him. He therefore demanded to know why. Wenfilbarna responded by asking whether he intended to attack her if she refused to answer. She observed that the cold expression on his face suited him well and remarked that Kaze knew Toyama better than he knew himself. Realizing that the situation was rapidly deteriorating, Toyama asked her to allow him to ask a different question. He knew he had no idea how he could possibly kill her, which meant that making an enemy of the elf would be a terrible decision. Determined to shift the conversation, he pointed out that it felt strange that she never referred to herself as Kaze. At that, Issa shot him a glare and told him to shut up. She added that both Toyama and Mars had always been reckless. Looking at him carefully, she remarked that Toyama gave off the impression of a bakery assistant or perhaps even a crow hunter. Toyama found that news reassuring, and Wenfilbarna wondered why he was wearing such tattered clothes. She asked what had happened to his explorer's gear, handgun, and arm hammers. Toyama replied that everything was gone. He explained that when he had regained consciousness, he had found himself on a wagon dressed in those ragged clothes. Wenfilbarna remarked that the situation was bad and that they could not afford to waste any more time. Rising to her feet, she told him that he needed to escape from that place immediately. Toyama responded that if escaping were that easy, he would not have been struggling in the first place. Wenfilbarna smirked at him and commented that Kaz truly did not like Toyama. She then spoke of the greedy mist which had appeared before her destiny, and of the adventurers driven by greed who had pushed the world forward. Despite possessing the power to preserve everything, she said that they had chosen to live as they pleased and be ruled by their desires. She continued saying that even though he was standing before her now, she had never once forgotten her wish. However, she admitted that perhaps everything had unfolded exactly as it was meant to. Toyama could not understand what she meant. Noticing his confusion, Wenfilbarna explained that she had merely been recalling what happened afterward. She revealed that Toyama had suddenly appeared at the guild out of nowhere and had been unable to use the return sigil possessed by the hoarding dragon because he was not originally from that world. Toyama wondered whether the return sigil was one of those abilities that only natives of that world could use. He assumed that anyone born in that world should be able to use it without any problems. Wenfilbarna remarked that Toyama was surprisingly sharp and jokingly attributed it to his otaku skills. She added that the guild crystal would probably fail to identify that trait. Annoyed, Toyama loudly insisted that he was not an otaku. Wenfilbarna then explained that she intended to help him escape. However, she pointed out that in his current state, he would never be able to climb the tower. She advised him to return to the city, specifically the adventurer city he had once tried to protect. She also suggested that their meeting with Kaz should remain a secret, explaining that numerous changes in the timeline had left her deeply concerned. As Toyama suddenly felt himself being lifted into the sky, he expressed his confusion and asked what she was talking about. Wenfilbarna replied that perhaps they should follow the usual procedure. She stated that she was willing to seal his memories. Toyama was horrified by the suggestion and begged her not to do so. He complained that the Explorers Union had already tampered with his memories countless times and that his brain now felt like a Happy Meal toy. Wenfilbarna commented that the situation sounded terrifying, and no wonder the people from Toyama's world had created someone like Mars. She then encouraged him to do his best out there and assured him that he would eventually meet Kaz. She admitted that she did not know whether Kaze would still be around by that time, but she was genuinely looking forward to that encounter. Referring to Tuyama as a greedy adventurer, she asked him to pass along her regards to the guild, the lazy lord, the sly lady bishop, and even those annoying dragons. She further warned him to be careful about anemia, teasing that he was both a freeloader dragon and a vampire's favorite snack. According to her, life was about to become much harder for him. Wenfilbarna also asked him to give her regards to Lazar. Thinking about it, she admitted that it was a shame she would never get to eat that bread again. Before sending him away, she warned him to watch out for the crows. She acknowledged that it was a lot to ask, but she still wanted him to kill that foolish Kaze by following his own desires. Finally, she expressed her hope that they would meet again someday. As a farewell, she spoke of how Kaze would have said goodbye. She described a dense and heavy mist that had obscured her fate, a man beloved by dragons, a sinner who had stolen the knowledge of a vampire, and a greedy, troublesome individual who was now wishing Tuyama a safe journey. As Tuyama gradually vanished from sight, Wenfilbarna calmly sat down in a chair that appeared instantly beside her. She told herself not to worry, reminding herself that those were merely painful memories. She reflected that Kaze had once been a terrifying individual who had reclaimed the world through overwhelming power only to destroy it afterward. According to her, he could have ascended to godhood or perhaps even reached the level of the angels. However, he had never been able to overcome his own desires. Driven by those desires, he would continue moving forward until he personally destroyed any ending he refused to accept. Despite everything, she felt strangely relieved. The path may have already diverged from its original course, but that was acceptable. The choices she had made and the choices he had made belonged to different stories. Just as the wind carried tales of its own, they too had to continue moving forward. 1 month passed after the death of the dragon. At the Adventurers Guild, a massive commotion had broken out. Marie watched over the chaos as adventurers argued and caused disturbances throughout the hall. One particularly muscular woman even lifted someone and hurled them across the room. Suddenly, a powerful gust of wind swept through the guild. The disturbance immediately grew worse, causing everyone to wonder who had activated such a skill. Within the pressure of the headwind, Tuyama suddenly appeared. He looked furious at a certain elf, but the people around him were too shocked to focus on that. Instead, they stared at the black-haired human and wondered whether he was a slave. Meanwhile, Tuyama looked around in confusion, trying to figure out where exactly he had arrived. The people in the guild wondered whether the black-haired man was the slave whom the dragon priestess had been searching for. A wave of shock spread through the crowd as many recognized him. They realized that it was Tuyama, the black-haired slave adventurer who had shattered an entire party, and the very man the Empire had been searching for. Rumors claimed that a reward of 10,000 imperial gold coins had been placed on him. More importantly, he was said to be the one who had slain the hoarding dragon. Despite the enormous bounty, most of the adventurers were reluctant to get involved. Tuyama's reputation alone was enough to make them hesitate. However, someone eventually pointed out that Tuyama was dressed in worn, ragged clothes. His hair was messy, and he did not look particularly strong. The crowd began to wonder what they should do. One man remarked that every instinct in his body was warning him to stay away. He suggested that everyone leave the guild before they got caught up in something dangerous. Hearing that, several adventurers quickly agreed and began making their way toward the exit. Meanwhile, Tuyama watched the entire scene unfold in confusion. He thought that perhaps the people who had been looking for trouble were finally leaving. Even so, he still had no idea what he was supposed to do next. All of a sudden, a young woman screamed that Tuyama should be killed. She blamed him for the death of her sister, claiming that her sister had been eaten alive by a monster because of the chaos that followed when Tuyama had encouraged the other slaves to rebel. Consumed by grief and rage, she declared that if someone killed Tuyama, they could have her in return. She insisted that she no longer cared about anything else as long as Tuyama died. Her outburst sent a wave of unease through the guild. People remembered how the dragon priestess had personally appeared and ordered the search for Tuyama. The moment she had given that command, it had echoed throughout the empire. From nobles to commoners, and even beggars on the streets, everyone had obeyed her order without question. Yet despite knowing all of that, the woman continued to demand Tuyama's death. At that moment, many in the guild realized that Tuyama was far from an ordinary person. The fact that someone as influential as the dragon priestess had mobilized an entire empire to find him was proof enough. Whatever secrets surrounded him, they were clearly tied to forces far greater than any of them had imagined. The dragon priestess glared at the cat girl and remarked that she had heard something rather peculiar. She admitted that she was surprised to see so much hatred and passion burning within the girl's heart, and stated that she had become interested in meeting her. With a mere gesture, the cat girl suddenly collapsed to the ground, screaming in pain. The dragon priestess then turned her attention toward Tuyama and informed him that she had been searching for him. Toyama immediately grew tense under the overwhelming pressure radiating from her presence. She began speaking about the wounds carved into her body, the fear deeply planted within her heart, and the pain that pierced her chest and throbbed every time she fell asleep. She described those nights as strangely lonely, yet unforgettable. Toyama could not understand what she was talking about. The dragon priestess continued by saying that there were many things she wished to discuss with him and asked him to accompany her. However, Toyama warned her to stay where she was. He pointed out that she might not realize it, but she was already within his attack range. At that moment, Toyama felt something strange. The dragon priestess calmly remarked that she had already memorized that ability and had been told to make good use of it. Noticing Toyama's shocked expression, she assured him that there was no need to be afraid. She invited him to come closer and added that if he refused, she would simply approach him herself. Toyama quickly asked her to wait and demanded to know how she was able to use the haze blade. She replied that the answer was obvious because she had once been killed by it. According to her, it had been a truly painful and vicious experience. Nevertheless, she praised Toyama, saying that he had been a remarkable hunter. Toyama responded that he had merely made sure to finish the job. The dragon priestess agreed and admitted that the final blow had indeed been effective. She then revealed the scars and injuries that still marked her body. Seeing them, Toyama was left speechless. The dragon priestess explained that she had desperately wanted to meet the man who had surpassed even dragons and who had slain her beloved mate. Toyama became even more confused. Ignoring his confusion, she remarked that such behavior was highly inappropriate for a member of the human race. She then declared that she had come to take Toyama away as her husband. Toyama stared at her in disbelief. She further explained that leaving someone as extraordinary as Toyama to live as a slave simply did not feel right. Clapping her hands, she called for her grandfather. Moments later, an elderly man appeared and addressed her as Alice. Alice immediately ordered him to increase the church's donations 2- or 3-fold. She explained that she had originally believed the matter to be nothing more than a tribal prophecy, but Toyama's abilities had proven to be genuine. Her grandfather nodded in agreement. He then asked about Toyama. Alice explained that Toyama was the slave who had slain the dragon and that tearing apart her body from the inside had been no small feat. Her grandfather agreed and remarked that Toyama had indeed inflicted such wounds upon her. Then, all of a sudden, he fixed Toyama with a sharp glare. The overwhelming pressure behind that look immediately made Toyama nervous. Alice quickly calmed her grandfather, pointing out that Toyama had even sensed his faint killing intent and asking him to stop intimidating their guest. Her grandfather nodded in understanding and remarked that Toyama was clearly no ordinary slave. He then asked Toyama for his name. However, Alice unexpectedly hesitated before introducing him, or even asking for his name herself. Seeing her reaction, her grandfather immediately understood. It was the first time he had ever seen Alice make such an expression. Turning toward Toyama, he commented that Toyama was a very dangerous individual. He explained that Toyama's karma ran deep and that he seemed unusually accustomed to bloodshed and battle. From what he could see, it was no surprise that Toyama had once managed to kill Alice. Toyama, meanwhile, realized that the old man was also a monster in his own right, which only made the entire situation even more absurd. Alice proudly remarked that it was exactly what she had expected from her future husband. She praised Toyama for being able to recognize her grandfather's greatness and added that the human race was truly fascinating. Her grandfather then politely asked Toyama whether he could trouble him for a while. Toyama felt as though he had no real choice in the matter, but he was willing to see what they intended to do. He then protested that the entire situation was ridiculous. After all, he had killed Alice, yet she was acting as though everything was perfectly normal. Not only that, but she was a beautiful woman who kept referring to him as her husband. Since his life was already complicated enough, he asked her to give him some time to process everything. Alice suggested that he should simply go outside and get some fresh air. However, her grandfather immediately pointed out that Toyama was clearly trying to escape from them. The realization left Alice shocked. She exclaimed that she had even taken extra care with her appearance and dressed up for the occasion, so she could not understand why her husband wanted to run away. Toyama wondered whether she was simply an idiot. More importantly, he wanted to know how she was still walking around after he had killed her. At that, Alice's grandfather realized that Toyama was not originally from the Empire. He explained that such things were part of a dragon's nature. High-ranking dragons possessed 7 lives and were naturally inclined to acknowledge those who defeated them. Furthermore, they desired to bear even stronger offspring with those victors. According to him, this was common knowledge throughout both the Empire and the Kingdom. Hearing that, Toyama thought that his first destination should probably be a library. However, Alice's grandfather continued his observations. He explained that Toyama possessed something extremely rare within the landscape of his mind. It was neither a system nor a skill. Instead, it seemed that something unpleasant resided deep within him. Alice immediately asked whether something was wrong. Her grandfather replied that there likely was. He explained that further investigation might require force and suggested that bringing Toyama to the Eastern Estate would be the best course of action. Suddenly, a quest notification appeared before Toyama. Main quest triggered. Escape from the guild. Toyama stared at the objective in disbelief and thought that the system had chosen a remarkably inconvenient time to assign such a mission. At that moment, Alice reminded everyone not to injure Toyama too badly. She explained that he was already part of her collection. Toyama responded by saying that it was exactly the kind of arrogant talk he would expect from powerful beasts. In his opinion, she was no different from that armored dragon he had encountered before. Secretly, he hoped that provoking her would make her lose her temper and reveal an opening. Instead, Alice calmly explained that if any ordinary human had spoken to her that way, she would have erased them without hesitation. However, when Toyama said such things, her heart only started racing faster. She added that Toyama spoke exactly what was on his mind. Even though his words hurt her feelings, she found them strangely delightful. Toyama became even more confused. Rather than getting angry, she seemed genuinely pleased. Her grandfather explained that Alice was probably happy because of Toyama's honesty. Dragons like her could naturally perceive the hearts and emotions of mortal beings. Finally, the old man stated that this would be the last time he asked politely. He wanted to know whether Toyama was willing to come with them. Toyama immediately refused. He replied that one of the most important lessons he had learned in school was never to follow strangers he did not know. Suddenly, Alice's grandfather moved with astonishing speed and appeared directly in front of Toyama. However, Toyama instinctively raised his guard and managed to react in time. The old man praised Toyama's reaction speed, but guessed that it had probably been nothing more than luck and reflex. He explained that creatures who had repeatedly brushed against death often developed such instincts, and he admitted that he did not dislike that trait. Meanwhile, Toyama could only wonder what kind of being could move so incredibly fast. The old man then remarked that it seemed his second strike had connected properly. At that moment, a notification appeared before Toyama. Main quest failed, and kingdom route erased. Before Toyama could fully process the message, he collapsed to the ground. Looking down at him, Alice's grandfather calmly introduced himself as one of the holders of a seat among the tower ranks. Soon afterward, Margrave and Marie arrived at the scene. Alice greeted them and commented that they had finally arrived. Confused, Margrave asked what was happening. Alice replied that she had found what she had been searching for and was simply taking it back with her. She further announced that an official statement would be released by the Dragon Embassy within 5 hours and that she would personally explain everything during the assembly. She then instructed Margrave to bring the city's representative to the embassy. Margrave immediately agreed. Meanwhile, Marie respectfully knelt before Alice and apologized for the unsightly scene. She assured her that the unconscious adventurers involved would be dealt with according to guild regulations. Alice laughed and admitted that she was currently in a very good mood. However, she also remarked that the quality gap among adventurers was truly appalling. Marie respectfully accepted the criticism and promised that she would draft corrective measures and submit them before the end of the day. Alice then reflected that she had apparently misunderstood humanity. Some people had approached her directly with marriage proposals, while others, such as the local lord, had approached her while maintaining their pride and dignity. There were even those who had confronted her with killing intent. Because of that, she found mortals far more interesting than she had originally thought. Humanity was constantly changing and was far less boring than she had expected. With that, she announced that they would meet again in 5 hours. At the same time, Alice's grandfather lifted the unconscious Toyama onto his shoulder and asked whether they should take him with them. He suggested that he could simply carry Toyama back himself. Alice immediately agreed. However, as soon as she saw the old man casually carrying Toyama over his shoulder, her face suddenly turned red. Marie and Margrave watched the scene unfold in silence. Then Alice hurriedly shouted at her grandfather, telling him to carry Toyama more carefully and gently. She insisted that he stop handling him so roughly and declared that she would personally take care of such matters herself. Seeing her reaction, both Marie and Margrave immediately understood what was happening. A higher life form had found its chosen mate. After a brief silence, Margrave sighed and wondered whether claiming to have an ancient class lecture to attend would be enough to excuse him from the Dragon Assembly. Marie calmly replied that he should simply accept reality for the day and attend the assembly without complaint. Toyama had a dream that brought back memories of his very first friend, Taro the dog. They had met beneath a bridge long ago. Although Toyama could never truly understand what Taro was saying, the two shared a special bond and were genuinely happy whenever they were together. Despite coming from different worlds, they were true friends. They spent countless joyful moments together. Toyama often complained to Taro about the people at the facility, including a certain man who had once hit him and called him cheeky and strange. Whenever Toyama vented his frustrations, Taro would affectionately lick him, making him feel better. Remembering those days filled both of them with laughter and warmth. As the dream continued, Toyama happily suggested that they go on an adventure together. The next day, they decided to travel somewhere far away. As long as they were together, Toyama believed they could overcome anything and would never lose to anyone. However, their conversation was interrupted when Toyama heard someone calling for him. He told Taro that he had to leave for now, otherwise he would get scolded again. Before leaving, he asked Taro to wait for him until the next day. After Toyama departed, Taro returned to his small shelter and fell asleep. Sometime later, several people arrived, seemingly searching for someone. Disturbed by their presence, Taro came out angrily to confront them. The people became irritated and turned their hostility toward him. Taro remembered the promise he had made to Toyama and desperately fought against those who attacked him. Despite his efforts, he was brutally beaten and eventually thrown into a nearby river. As he struggled to stay conscious, his greatest regret was not the pain he endured or the hardships he faced. Instead, he felt sorrow because he could no longer protect the place he had promised to guard. More than anything, Taro was heartbroken by the thought that Toyama would come looking for him the next day and never find him. The most painful realization was that he would never see Toyama again, nor hear what his dear friend would say when he discovered that Taro was gone. As Taro sank beneath the water, he heard a mysterious voice. It spoke of something unexpected, something that existed beyond the javelin stars and far above ordinary pain. It was beyond twisted logic and hidden within sharp, impossible angles. From those depths, something began to emerge. The essence of a dog and a strange hound merged together, forming a being whose deep-rooted malice perfectly suited its vessel. The voice continued, explaining that a cursed woman had taken everything from him. However, through her, there might still be a chance for survival. The voice offered Taro an opportunity, a final chance to continue existing. When the time finally came, ink appeared. Meanwhile, Toyama arrived at the river in search of Taro. Taro felt overwhelming guilt because he had failed to keep the promise he had made. Desperate to find his friend, Toyama asked several children if they had seen Taro. The children pointed toward the river. Upon hearing what had happened, Toyama was shocked and furious. One of the people involved continued talking carelessly, which only fueled Toyama's anger. In a fit of rage, Toyama grabbed the person and forced them underwater. Watching this unfold, Taro realized that Toyama possessed neither fangs nor claws to defend himself. At that moment, he resolved that he would become Toyama's fangs and claws. The mysterious voice observed this determination and declared that the beast had become the vessel's bond with humanity. It considered the title fitting for the fangs and claws wielded by a human. The will demonstrated by this bond was stronger than expected. The voice stated that it mattered little what name the creature had carried before. Whether its whiteness came from the snowy peaks of distant mountains or the mist that spread across vast plains, it would now take on a new identity. The fangs and claws wielded by man would henceforth be known as the Blade. From within the haze, the voice continued to watch Toyama. It foresaw a day when Toyama would completely devour that haze and continue their adventure together. The creature vowed to ensure that Toyama would never have to cry again. It would continue helping him until he obtained everything he desired. The dream then shifted, and Toyama imagined restarting his adventures with Taro once more. Suddenly, Toyama awoke in bed. Reflecting on the dream, he remarked to himself that it had been a nostalgic memory. As he looked around, he noticed that Alice was sleeping beside him. While asleep, she softly called out for her mother. Toyama immediately became flustered and hurriedly tried to move away from her, only to lose his balance and fall from the bed. After recovering, he stood up and looked around the room. Everything appeared unusually large to him. Unsure of what to do next, he attempted to quietly leave through the door. However, he was startled to find Gramps already standing there. Gramps greeted him with a cheerful good morning. Surprised, Toyama wondered how he had arrived so suddenly. Gramps casually replied that he had been there all along. Gramps then addressed Toyama as his future son-in-law and asked where he intended to go. Toyama hesitated before admitting that he had not made any plans yet. In response, Gramps remarked that recklessness was a privilege reserved for youth. He informed Toyama that he would need to change into proper attire before entering the assembly. Furthermore, he explained that Toyama no longer had any need for the handcuffs he had been wearing. With ease, Gramps broke them apart. Afterward, Gramps announced that he would call the girls to help prepare Toyama's clothing. Before Toyama could fully understand what was happening, several girls arrived and began leading him away. Completely confused by the sudden turn of events, Toyama could only wonder what exactly was happening to him. After some time, Toyama returned, now dressed in formal attire. Upon seeing him, Gramps remarked that it seemed the maids had not been necessary after all. Toyama replied that he was a working adult and was capable of dressing himself. The maids then wondered whether Toyama had ever worn such elegant clothing before. They continued complimenting his appearance, noting how well the outfit suited him. Gramps commented that there were many things he wished to ask Toyama, but unfortunately time was precious and there were more urgent matters to attend to. He then escorted Toyama to a massive set of doors known as the Dragon Assembly Hall. As they stood before the entrance, Gramps explained that it was a sacred hall where all matters concerning dragons within the Empire were discussed and decided. He added that it appeared everyone had already gathered inside. Looking at the imposing doors, Toyama compared the place to a boss room from a game. Hearing this, Gramps advised him not to be so nervous. Moments later, the enormous doors slowly opened. As Toyama stepped into the hall, he was greeted by the sight of numerous people seated on both sides of the chamber. At the far end stood an elevated throne, positioned high above the rest of the assembly. Sitting upon it was Alice. The moment she noticed Toyama's arrival, she warmly addressed him as her husband and remarked that he had finally arrived. Faced with the unexpected greeting and the attention of the entire assembly, Toyama found himself standing in the center of the hall, unsure of how he was supposed to react. Toyama was asked to step into the center of the assembly hall. Gramps personally placed a chair there and invited him to sit down. As Toyama took his seat, the attention of everyone in the hall turned toward him. One of the women remarked that it was quite rare to see someone with black hair and chestnut-colored eyes. Margrave silently hoped that nothing troublesome would happen during the gathering, while Marie had a bad feeling about the situation. The assembly members carefully observed the husband of the dragon priestess. One woman asked whether anyone had noticed anything special about him, but another shook her head and said she had not. A third member commented that at the very least his clothing was quite impressive. From her throne, Alice observed the scene before speaking. She declared that the city's beloved adventurers and the most exceptional individuals among mortals, those who had helped sustain and protect the city, had all gathered there. She then introduced the distinguished members present in the hall. First was Merchant Guildmaster Spina, next was Margrave, followed by Marie. After them came the shopkeeper Kano Satiel. Then there was the holy maiden Svidak. Finally, the last member introduced was Clan Aduster, the fourth knight among the renowned 10 knights. Once the introductions were complete, Alice began addressing the assembly. She first apologized for the commotion she had caused at the Adventurers Guild. Before she could continue, however, Marie suddenly rose from her seat. Speaking on behalf of the guild, she stated that they were sincerely grateful for Alice's generous treatment and understanding. She humbly requested that Alice pass whatever judgment she deemed appropriate upon those who had ignored or disrespected her words. Hearing this, Alice asked whether Marie's statement reflected the consensus of the entire guild. Marie confirmed that it did. Pleased with the answer, Alice remarked that the guildmaster was indeed wise. Since she was in a particularly good mood, she decided not to pursue the matter further. Instead, she made an unusual request. She asked for a female cat to be brought to her before the upcoming Dragon Festival, explaining that she wished to spend time with it and train alongside it. Toyama found himself distracted by the heavily armored knight standing among the assembly members and wondered about that person's identity. Meanwhile, Marie respectfully accepted Alice's request and assured her that the matter would be handled. She promised that the requested cat would be delivered before the Dragon Festival as ordered. The gathering continued, while Toyama remained seated in the center of the hall, still trying to understand the strange and overwhelming events unfolding around him. Alice continued by stating that, as a dragon, she found it intolerable to leave behind the offspring of such a creature. She further declared that if the creature had a family, they should all be brought before her as well, so that they could serve as playthings for the worm together. Although Margrave clearly did not approve of such a decision, Marie had no choice but to agree with Alice's wishes. After issuing her command, Alice instructed Marie to step back. At that moment, Toyama spoke up. Referring to Alice's mention of the creature's family, he cautiously asked whether she was talking about the pet dog. His question immediately confused everyone present in the assembly. Alice calmly confirmed that not a single one of them would be spared, and that all of them would be devoured. She added that it would make no difference whether they were pet dogs or cats. Toyama paid little attention to the cat-eared woman involved in the discussion. Instead, he firmly requested that Alice stop the matter altogether, arguing that the dog had done nothing wrong and did not deserve such treatment. Upon hearing Toyama's words, Kano Satiel secretly thought that Toyama might have just signed his own death warrant. To everyone's surprise, however, Alice simply laughed. Amused by his response, she remarked that if Toyama felt that strongly about it, then she would reconsider her previous order. Ignoring what she had said earlier, she announced a new decision. Instead of bringing the entire family, only the cat girl was to be brought before her. The sudden change left the entire assembly stunned. Alice noticed Marie's shocked expression and asked why she looked so surprised. Marie quickly apologized and accepted the revised order without question. Meanwhile, Margrave quietly asked Marie what had just happened. Marie admitted that she did not understand the situation either. Changing the subject, Alice commented that the suit Tuyama was wearing looked very good on him. Tuyama politely thanked her for the compliment. Just then, Clan suddenly rose from his seat, unable to contain his irritation any longer. Referring to Tuyama as a mere slave, he declared that he had remained silent up until that point. He demanded to know whether Tuyama even understood who was seated before him. Clan proceeded to remind him that Alice was the guardian of the Empire, the sacred bond between dragons and humanity, and the dragon priestess herself. He questioned how someone like Tuyama could dare show such disrespect toward her. In his view, a low-born individual such as Tuyama would normally never be permitted to even gaze upon someone of Alice's status. Despite Clan's hostility, Tuyama remained calm. He simply asked Clan to lower his sword because it was frightening him. Tuyama added that threatening an unarmed person with a weapon was hardly admirable unless Clan simply enjoyed waving his sword around. Those words only enraged Clan further. Just as he was about to attack Tuyama, Alice intervened. Her expression immediately turned cold, and she fixed Clan with an intimidating glare. In a sharp tone, she demanded to know who had given him permission to act in such a manner. She reminded him that the conversation was between herself and her husband alone, and that he had no right to interfere. The entire assembly fell silent as Alice's anger filled the hall, making it clear that even a knight of Clan's status could not ignore her authority. Kano Satiel remarked that this was precisely why she had not wanted Clan to attend the assembly. She then stepped forward and respectfully begged Alice for mercy, explaining that Clan's words had only been spoken out of his devotion and loyalty to her. She added that, as a human, Clan merely longed for the guidance and presence of dragons. Alice appeared somewhat surprised by Kano Satiel's sincere plea. She responded that it was the prophecy that had brought her together with Tuyama in the first place. Nevertheless, she decided not to pursue the matter further. Although Clan had been severely burned by Alice's wrath, Kano Satiel continued her appeal. She acknowledged that Clan was a fool, but as one of the 10 swords of the Angel Church, she humbly requested that Alice show mercy and allow him to be healed. Alice replied that it was no surprise Clan was still alive, considering that he was one of the Empire's renowned 10 knights. Since he had managed to survive, she decided that healing him would be acceptable. Kano Satiel immediately expressed her gratitude for Alice's mercy. Afterward, attention shifted to Svidak. Following the request, Svidak began chanting a healing prayer and invoked the sacred healing hand sacrament. A warm light enveloped Clan's burned body as the healing magic gradually restored his injuries. Observing the scene, Alice commented that Svidak truly deserved her reputation as the church's holiest saint, and that the rumors regarding her divine blessings had not been exaggerated. Hearing such praise, Svidak became deeply emotional and humbly stated that she was unworthy of such compliments. Once Clan had recovered, Svidak turned toward him and sternly reminded him that he had survived only because of Alice's forgiveness and the mercy of Baishaw. She warned him that if he failed to understand that lesson, he might not be fortunate enough to survive a second time. With that matter resolved, the assembly moved on to its primary purpose. Alice declared that the chosen representatives of mankind should already understand why they had been summoned. She then directed everyone's attention toward Tuyama, the black-haired slave who had slain the hoarding dragon. Addressing him directly, Alice announced that she was granting him the honor of sitting before her. She even overlooked the fact that he had interrupted her earlier and, in an unexpected gesture, invited him to stand as her equal. The declaration stunned the assembly. Among all of humanity, Tuyama alone had been granted such treatment. Many had assumed that Alice, as the dragon priestess, would be bound by human customs, traditions, and social status. However, they were mistaken. In Alice's eyes, there was only one person she truly acknowledged. The only individual capable of standing beside her and binding her through fate was the man who had defeated her. That man was Tuyama. As the realization settled over the hall, the atmosphere grew heavy with shock and disbelief. The assembly members could hardly comprehend that a former slave had been elevated to a position no ordinary human could ever hope to attain. Alice continued her declaration by stating that, after everything she had said, her intentions should now be perfectly clear to everyone present and, by extension, to the entire empire. From that day forward, she officially recognized Tuyama as her mate. According to dragon tradition, this would constitute a dragon's wedding. She instructed everyone to regard it as a great honor, and to celebrate the occasion throughout Adventurer City and across the entire empire. She further proclaimed that, through their union, the bond between the empire and dragonkind would become eternal. Upon hearing this, Margrave grew visibly nervous. He remarked that people could forget about the Dragon Festival entirely because it had suddenly transformed into a royal wedding celebration, a prospect that genuinely frightened him. Marie, on the other hand, observed that the event would undoubtedly become a magnificent celebration. Alice responded that some murmuring and surprise were only natural. However, she insisted that a wedding was an occasion meant to be celebrated. She invited anyone who opposed the arrangement to voice their objections immediately. If no one spoke, she declared that silence and obedience would be accepted as consent. She then expressed her satisfaction, explaining that an ancient bond between dragons and humans had once again been fulfilled. To be united with a dragon slayer, she said, was the deepest desire of any true dragon. Meanwhile, Toyama remained unable to fully understand everything that was happening around him. At that moment, Marie rose from her seat. Speaking on behalf of the Adventurers Guild, she formally congratulated Alice on her marriage. As a celebratory gift, the guild proposed holding a grand exhibition battle in the arena during the Dragon Festival. Alice considered the proposal and remarked that she wished to witness a battle between an ancient species and a tower-class opponent. Since such warriors were among the few beings capable of entertaining her, the idea interested her greatly. Marie assured her that the guild would prepare a spectacle worthy of her attention and would ensure that the event relieved any boredom she might feel. Next, Margrave stood and spoke on behalf of the Empire. He stated that the Empire welcomed the marriage and that the Emperor himself would surely regret being unable to witness such a historic moment in person. Alice accepted the sentiment and commented that Margrave's presence would suffice as a representative of the old Emperor. Margrave thanked her for her generosity and declared that the Empire would regard the marriage as a supreme act of benevolence from the hoarding dragon. Afterward, Alice turned her attention to economic matters. She ordered compensation to be distributed under the name of the Dragon Embassy and instructed officials to provide relief to the moneylenders. In her view, they had suffered enough, and their losses were negatively affecting trade throughout the city. Once that issue had been addressed, she asked whether anyone else wished to speak. Spina then stepped forward on behalf of the Merchant Guild. She announced that the guild would lower the rent on guild-owned shops and require all affiliated merchants to display commemorative decorations celebrating the dragon wedding. Alice immediately dismissed the proposal as insufficient. She demanded a more impressive plan and ordered Spina to present better suggestions to the Dragon Embassy by the following day. If they failed to entertain her, she warned that she might personally destroy their trade networks. Spina quickly assured her that the Merchant Guild would gather all of its wisdom and resources to create proposals worthy of Alice's interest. Satisfied for the moment, Alice called for the next speaker. Kano Satiel then stepped forward. She admitted that she understood a knight's life was insufficient to atone for the offense that had been committed, but she still humbly requested permission to impose an appropriate punishment after the festivities concluded. She also accepted responsibility for the misconduct of the church and asked that all blame fall upon her instead. Alice responded that Kano Satiel clearly knew she could not simply execute Clan. She remarked that Kano possessed a greed for gold that hardly suited a priest. Nevertheless, Alice found herself unable to dislike her. On the contrary, she admired the courage it had taken to stand before her and make such a request. As a result, Alice announced that she would forgive Kano Satiel's faults. Furthermore, in recognition of her courage and the role she had played in fulfilling the prophecy, Alice granted her mercy. Kano Satiel expressed her gratitude and declared that the Empire was fortunate to possess Alice's presence. Curious, Alice then asked what contribution the church intended to make toward the wedding celebrations. Kano Satiel replied that the church would significantly reduce the prices of essential goods under its control. Since the church managed the distribution rights to many resources, including those from the Lake of Angels, it would release supplies into the market at reduced costs. In addition, the church would compose and distribute new hymns praising Alice and commemorating the wedding. Alice approved of the proposal and ordered that everything be completed before the Dragon Festival. As the discussions continued, Alice reflected upon the ancient relationship between dragons and humans. For countless generations, dragons had stood above while humans remained below. It was a truth deeply engraved into the souls of all who lived in the world. Yet now, for the first time in centuries, she felt the emptiness within her beginning to disappear. Perhaps, she thought, the people of the world had simply forgotten the true meaning of those ancient bonds. To Alice, it was a blessed day. After 100 years of loneliness and boredom, her long solitude was finally coming to an end. She believed that she had obtained the greatest treasure a dragon could ever possess, Unfortunately for everyone involved, Toyama suddenly realized that they had all overlooked one very important detail. Marriage required the agreement of both parties. Without hesitation, Toyama interrupted the proceedings and bluntly stated that he was not going to marry Alice. Toyama already knew that dragons existed completely apart from everything else. They were higher beings who stood beyond human laws and could not be touched or controlled by humans. To be chosen as the mate of a dragon, the pinnacle of all living creatures, was considered equivalent to receiving a direct blessing from the world itself. Humans were only allowed to approach such sacred beings if a dragon personally chose them, and they regarded this as the highest possible honor. Dragons were sacred and absolute existences, a concept deeply engraved into the souls of every human in that world. Yet Toyama was rejecting the marriage proposal. Everyone, including Alice, was left stunned. The crowd's cheers abruptly died down as people wondered what had just happened. Toyama himself could not understand how the situation had somehow turned into a discussion about him marrying a dragon. Alice questioned why he was doing this, but before she could continue, she nearly collapsed. Gramps quickly stepped forward and caught her. Feeling embarrassed, she apologized and wondered if this was what people called marriage blues. Gramps told her to pull herself together. She lamented that despite being a dragon, she had still been rejected. Gramps remarked that such things could happen. Moments later, Alice stood up and glared at Toyama, declaring that he had completely misunderstood the situation. The crowd became even more shocked. Gramps then approached Toyama and explained that he clearly did not understand what marriage to a dragon truly meant. Such a union was equivalent to obtaining everything a human could ever desire. Humans lived by pursuing their desires, and those desires gave them the motivation to move forward. Therefore, rejecting such an opportunity was almost unimaginable. Gramps urged him to reconsider, insisting that no one else in the world could be more fortunate than him. However, Toyama's thoughts drifted elsewhere. If everything could simply be handed to him, then what would be the point? He remembered Taro's dream of going on adventures and recalled Lazar talking about building a bread shop by the lakeshore. Toyama laughed to himself, thinking that he was truly an idiot. To him, the best part of having a day off was not the day itself, but the night before it began. Likewise, in games, the most enjoyable part was never reaching the maximum level or becoming rich. The real fun came from earning money, creating plans, and finding clever solutions when resources were scarce. That struggle was what made everything worthwhile. Gramps observed him curiously, wondering what realization had crossed his mind. Toyama had finally understood something important. The most exciting part of achieving a dream was the effort required to make it come true. He decided that he would build a house by the lakeshore one day. To accomplish that, he first needed money. Everything required money. He would study the world's economy and currency system, find a job, and learn how the world worked. Although he only desired one thing and already knew where he wanted to go, there was still an endless amount of work ahead of him. It would be difficult and painful, but that was exactly why he was excited. The struggles, hardships, trials, and eventual joy of success were all parts of the journey he desired. As his confidence grew, Toyama declared that everything would belong to him through his own efforts. He would not accept even a single scrap from anyone else. He did not care about the rewards they offered him, nor did he want their gifts. He warned them not to touch what he considered his, or he would kill them. A dark mist suddenly spread around him. Lita carefully memorized the sight, determined to remember it for the future. As the haze grew thicker, Gramps realized that the force residing within Toyama was far more dangerous than any of them had imagined. Toyama calmly stated that this was merely a warning. He wanted everyone to leave him alone. No one had the right to choose his path for him. He would make his own decisions and follow only his own desires. Margrave hid behind Maria, trembling as he muttered that it felt like a nightmare to witness a human threatening a dragon. Toyama then ordered Gramps to step aside and stop interfering. Gramps looked astonished and remarked that Toyama had become incredibly bold. Toyama told him to move because he took no pleasure in bullying the elderly. This was only the beginning of his adventure, and countless challenges still awaited him. It was time for a new game to begin, and he intended to fulfill every one of his desires. Toyama continued by declaring that he would willingly face any danger that stood in his way. Even if it cost him his life, he would make his dreams come true. For the sake of his desires, he was prepared to risk everything. Gramps laughed and remarked that those sounded like Toyama's last words. Toyama immediately responded that Gramps was losing his sense of dignity. Gramps became irritated by the remark. As the tense atmosphere lingered, Alice remained standing silently. After a moment, she suddenly asked whether marrying her was truly that unpleasant for him. Toyama paused to think before answering honestly. He admitted that he did not like her at all. In his opinion, she had tried to kill Lazar, acted arrogantly, and always behaved as though she were superior to everyone else. That was why he hated her. Alice quietly asked if he truly hated her that much. Toyama confirmed it once again without hesitation. Those words caused Alice's expression to crumble. Tears began flowing from her eyes as she sadly admitted that she must have wronged him greatly. When she turned away, Gramps' worried expression became even more obvious. Alice then stated that she would rest for a while. She instructed Gramps to guide Toyama onto the proper path and personally escort him safely to the city. Gramps hesitated and asked if she was truly certain about that decision. She replied that Toyama had already made it clear that he hated her, and she no longer wanted to give him any additional reason to do so. As soon as she finished speaking, enormous dragon wings emerged from her back. With a powerful flap, she soared into the sky, shattering the roof above her in the process. Gramps' eyes widened in alarm, and he immediately called out for her to wait. Turning around, he ordered Farhan, the maid, to look after Toyama and the other guests while he went after Alice. The moment Gramps left, the atmosphere in the room became heavy with concern. Everyone seemed worried about Alice's condition. One of the women moved toward Margrave, seemingly trying to comfort him. Meanwhile, Margrave nervously remarked that he now understood why he should have attended the ancient Japanese preparation school. Marie thanked him for his efforts, though the tension in the room remained far from resolved. Alice continued flying high through the sky while replaying Toyama's words in her mind. He had said that he hated her. No matter how many times she thought about it, she could not understand why. She was a dragon, one of the greatest beings in existence. Everything should have gone according to her wishes. Toyama had been chosen by her, so why was he rejecting her? Eventually, she landed and sat alone, consumed by frustration. She could not understand why Toyama kept defying her. Every attempt to justify his actions only made her angrier. Her soul burned with rage, and hatred began to fill her heart. At one point, she even imagined subjecting him to 1,000 deaths for humiliating her. When Gramps arrived and attempted to calm her down, she refused to listen. Toyama's words continued to echo in her mind. He had told her not to get in his way. He had openly declared that he disliked her and even hated her. Remembering those words left her heart aching. For the first time, she realized that Toyama did not belong to her simply because she wished it. He hated her, and she no longer knew what she was supposed to do. Gramps sighed and gently pointed out that she was obviously troubled. He urged her to return because running away from Toyama at a moment like this would solve nothing. Alice shook her head. She admitted that she finally understood that she had probably angered Toyama. She did not want to be rejected again or continue feeling so pathetic. Although she was a dragon, the only way she had ever known to obtain what she wanted was through force and overwhelming power. She confessed that she did not understand these complicated feelings at all. Gramps replied that becoming mates was not the only way for a dragon and a human to stand beside one another. More importantly, it was not the only way for two individuals with their own wills to walk the same path. He reminded her that she had always been closer to humanity than any other dragon, perhaps even more than the all-knowing hoarding dragon. Meeting the Dragon Slayer had forced her to leave behind her childish view of the world. Through pain, struggle, and growth, she now stood at the threshold of a new stage in her life. Because of that, he told her not to give up on Toyama. Toyama was her Dragon Slayer, therefore she should never let him go. However, Alice could only remember the words that Toyama hated her. The tears began flowing again. Gramps gently wiped the tears from her face and asked whether she truly believed everything was hopeless. He reminded her that she was a dragon. If a single human could throw her into such complete disarray, then he genuinely worried about what would become of her. He told her to remember the pride of the hoarding dragon. Those words only made her angry. She declared that she would not forgive anyone, not even Gramps. Her anger shifted toward him as he teased her for behaving like a sulking little girl who had been dumped by a man. Enraged, she lunged at him. Although he was elderly, she was far stronger physically. Yet the moment she attacked, Gramps effortlessly stopped her. Startled, she immediately withdrew her strike and demanded to know whether he dared to raise a hand against his own master. Gramps calmly replied that his master was not someone who would break after a single defeat. He then asked Utamita whether she was truly certain that this was what she wanted. After all, she still did not understand what it meant to change. Gramps continued by saying that he would repeat his words as many times as necessary. She had to grow. The time had finally come for her to decide. Would she remain a lonely, superior being like the other dragons, forever separated from those around her? Or would she choose to become something different? Alice shouted for him to be quiet. Toyama had already said that he hated her. There had been no hesitation in his voice. She had heard enough. She was tired of feeling lost, miserable, and confused. If growing meant experiencing this much pain, then she wanted no part of it. Gramps shook his head. He explained that Tuyama would willingly bear such pain himself. He would accept both suffering and struggle as his own burdens and carry them with pride and dignity. Then he asked her a simple question. What did she truly want from her dragon slayer? What was she actually seeking? Alice fell silent. After a long pause, she finally admitted the truth. She only wanted to get along with Tuyama. She knew that she had made many mistakes. She had misjudged him, forced her will upon him, and acted without considering his feelings. It was no surprise that he hated her. Even so, she still wanted to talk to him. She wanted to understand him. Though it felt embarrassing to admit, she wanted him to call her by her name. As she spoke those words aloud, her heart gradually settled. For the first time, she realized that she did not want to give up on him. With newfound determination, she wondered what she needed to do in order to truly get along with Tuyama. Gramps smiled with satisfaction. This was exactly what he had wanted to see in her eyes. He explained that although she had failed once and experienced defeat, it was not the end. Instead, it was the beginning of something new. This was the moment for her to grow. The only way to overcome the pain of an unfulfilled desire was to continue facing it rather than running away. He assured her that this was not a punishment. It was her very first real adventure. To grow, she needed to pursue it, learn from it, and never stop confronting it. As the hoarding dragon, whenever she desired something, she had never once deceived her own heart. If she truly wanted Tuyama, then she would have to win him over herself. That was the only way to fill the emptiness in her heart and cure the boredom that had followed her for so long. Therefore, she should set out on that adventure. Born among humans, a guardian among dragons, she now stood at the beginning of her own journey. Every adventurer needed a destination, a goal that guided them forward. Gramps then asked her a simple question. What was the one wish she wanted to reach above all else? Alice slowly raised her head. Together they looked toward the endless sky stretching above them. For some reason, the scenery seemed completely different from before. After a moment of silence, Alice finally answered. She said that she wanted to see that scenery together with Tuyama. She declared that she would defeat Tuyama's resistance and surely bring him there with her someday. Although the thought was a little frightening, she admitted that it did not feel bad. In fact, it felt exciting. She then apologized to Gramps and awkwardly admitted that perhaps the feeling could even be described as fun. Gramps laughed and wondered if this was the true nature of the hoarding dragon finally revealing itself. He then suggested that they return and meet Tuyama once again. The moment he said that, Alice immediately became nervous. Sensing her unease, Gramps reassured her that they would stake their lives on supporting her adventure. Then, a mischievous grin appeared on his face. He claimed that he had a splendid idea. According to him, there was an old saying from the Second Civilization, long before the Great War. The saying spoke of a bond that was formed through intimacy and mutual understanding. The moment Alice heard that, her face turned bright red. Flustered, she demanded to know what he was planning. As Gramps prepared to explain his idea, Alice suddenly shouted that she was getting a very bad feeling about all of this. Unfortunately for her, Gramps' smile only widened, making her even more suspicious of whatever scheme he had in mind. After everything that had happened, Tuyama went to take a bath and felt incredibly relaxed. Although he was surprised that he was using someone else's bath, he decided not to think too much about it and simply enjoyed the peaceful atmosphere. The place was remarkably quiet, yet he remained confused about everything that had occurred earlier. Since Gita had been crying, Tuyama initially suspected that she might have been deceived, but he quickly shook those thoughts away. He did not want such concerns to ruin the pleasant bath he was having. A little later, Gramps appeared and asked how the water temperature was. Tuyama replied that it was perfect and very comfortable. Gramps was pleased to hear that. After a brief silence, Tuyama suddenly realized something and asked when Gramps had arrived. Gramps answered that he had been there since the maids had thrown Tuyama into the bath. Tuyama was shocked to learn that Gramps had been present from the very beginning. Gramps remarked that it was simply the refinement expected of a butler. Tuyama then asked whether Gita was all right. Gramps assured him that she was merely resting because the earlier events had exhausted her. He pointed out that, despite wanting to kill Tuyama, she had allowed him to sit beside her and even use her bath. He wondered whether Tuyama realized how unusual that was for an elf. Tuyama admitted that the situation had been frightening and that he had not been able to relax completely. However, since he was using her bath, he did not want to be rude. Gramps was pleasantly surprised by Tuyama's politeness and the two shared a laugh. A moment later, Tuyama wondered whether Gita had shown anyone the armored man he had killed. He questioned whether she would reveal the truth and why she seemed to care about him. He even wondered whether she had any special feelings for him. Gramps explained that Tuyama was not from that region and therefore did not understand how deeply the kingdom revered dragons. Tuyama agreed, saying that he had come from far away and had grown up without parents or formal education. Deciding to explain, Gramps began teaching Toyama about dragons. He first asked what Toyama already knew about them. Toyama answered that dragons were creatures with reptilian traits that appeared in myths as either trials for heroes or omens of calamity sent from heaven. Before Toyama could continue, Gramps interrupted and stated that dragons possessed 7 lives. Toyama was astonished. Gramps explained that dragons existed beyond continuity, aging, and even death. They transcended magic formulas, skills, and the system itself. Such beings had been permitted to exist beyond the limitations of ordinary life. However, Gramps also spoke of a man who had once rejected a dragon's offer and declared that he desired nothing from it. Toyama compared the situation to buying an extremely hyped game only to have the ending spoiled before even playing it. Suddenly, Gramps bowed deeply and apologized for repeatedly treating Toyama discourteously. He admitted that he had underestimated him and had threatened him carelessly. Gramps acknowledged that Toyama possessed the power to take a person's life if he wished. Despite feeling ashamed, he humbly asked Toyama to listen to their request. Shocked, Toyama immediately told Gramps to raise his head, insisting that an elder should never bow to someone younger. Gramps praised Toyama's generosity and took his hand, saying that he wished to discuss their request. Toyama stopped him, explaining that no apology was necessary and asking him to simply explain what he wanted. Gramps then pleaded with Toyama to give Gita one more chance. He explained that he had served her for over 100 years and that this was the first time he had ever seen her show such concern for another person. If Toyama understood how extraordinary that was, he would realize its significance. Gramps believed that it was proof that Gita genuinely wished to change and grow. More than anything, she did not want Toyama to hate her. Toyama remarked that it was asking far too much of him. However, Gramps explained that each dragon's name embodied a cosmic principle. Gita's case, however, was unusual. Her name represented a concept that dragons did not originally possess. According to Gramps, Gita was a dragon who balanced together the divine concepts of cherishing, valuing, and desiring things. As a hoarding dragon, she was far closer to humanity than any other dragon and had influenced the human world more deeply than most of her kind. Nevertheless, Gramps warned that if she continued on her current path, she would eventually become distorted. What she needed was a human who could stand beside her, someone capable of admonishing her and even opposing her whenever necessary. Toyama suggested that Gramps himself could fulfill that role, considering that he was strong and had faithfully served her as a butler for many years. However, Gramps shook his head and explained that he was no longer truly human. He described himself as a weak being who had lost the ability to stand as Gita's equal. Only a genuine human, he said, could truly stand beside a dragon. Gramps further explained that he had seen a certain nobility within Toyama. Toyama possessed the willingness to accept hardship as his own burden in order to fulfill his goals. Because of that, Gramps had become convinced that Toyama was the only person capable of standing on equal footing with Gita and becoming her true friend. Hearing this, Toyama pointed out that Gita had repeatedly tried to kill him and seemed to enjoy toying with people. Gramps admitted that this was true. Dragons, he explained, could never be completely separated from cruelty. However, he believed that Gita's behavior resembled that of a child who had never had someone to teach her the difference between right and wrong. Even so, he openly acknowledged that his explanation might sound like nothing more than an excuse. As Toyama listened, he quietly reflected on Gramps' words. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that Gita resembled his younger self. Like him in the past, she seemed to be someone who had grown up without proper guidance and had never truly learned how to interact with others. Gramps admitted that the request he had made was incredibly selfish. However, Toyama replied that the person who truly needed to hear those words was Gita, not a mere visitor like him. He pointed out that he had killed her once as well, so in a sense they were even. As long as she did not try to attack him again, he was willing to let the matter rest. To his surprise, Toyama noticed that Gramps had begun crying. Gramps explained that he had simply been overwhelmed by emotion. Moments later, he grabbed Toyama by the shoulders and declared that there was not a single lie in his words. Toyama quickly assured him that he had not been lying and asked him to stop shaking him, as it was making his head spin. Gramps laughed and said that he would leave the rest to the two of them. He then wished Gita the best of luck, believing that her victory was finally possible. After Gramps left, a voice suddenly came from behind Toyama. Gita revealed herself and explained that Gramps ranked among the strongest beings within the tower. Erasing his presence completely was a trivial feat for someone of his level. Toyama understood that it was simply an application of pure physical ability. However, before he could think further, he froze. Someone had already appeared directly behind him without him noticing. Realizing who it was, Gita immediately became flustered and shouted at him not to turn around. Only then did Toyama realize that she had entered the bath as well. In a panic, Toyama sank deeper into the water and warned her not to make him report the situation as harassment. Gita responded that there was nothing about her body she was ashamed of. Nevertheless, she had no desire to show it to Toyama. Toyama immediately told her not to come any closer. Misunderstanding his reaction, Gita quietly remarked that, as expected, Toyama was still angry with her. Toyama then asked whether she truly was that armored person he had fought before. Gita instantly denied it, shouting that she was not simply that armored person, and that she had her own name. Toyama nodded in understanding. Recalling what Gramps had said earlier, he addressed her by her name, Gita. The moment she heard her name spoken by him, Gita became visibly flustered. Toyama wondered whether she was growling. She quickly denied it and insisted that she was a fully grown dragon. When Toyama called her by name again, she let out another strange sound before asking what exactly Gramps and Toyama had been discussing. Toyama honestly answered that they had been talking about her. He explained that Gramps wanted the two of them to become friends. Gita was stunned. For a brief moment, her thoughts wandered elsewhere. Toyama was her mate, and hearing him speak about friendship instead of something more left her completely speechless. After collecting herself, she introduced herself as the Hoarding Dragon. Toyama remained calm and casually remarked that her innocent act was making him look like the villain for having killed her so brutally. Gita responded by praising Toyama's complete lack of hesitation. She found it incredibly impressive and said that it reminded her of legendary hunters from ancient tales. Toyama could not help wondering why her opinion of him seemed so high despite the fact that they had once shared a kill or be killed relationship. Finally, Gita revealed what had truly been on her mind. She explained that Toyama had been the first person to directly challenge her. When she revived after her death, she had expected to feel rage. Instead, what filled her heart was curiosity and joy. From that moment onward, Toyama had occupied her thoughts. She had constantly wondered why he opposed her and why he refused to obey her even once. Those questions had never left her mind. Wanting answers, she had tried to understand him by observing him. Yet the more she learned, the less she understood. All her life, she had taken whatever she desired through force. Therefore, she could not understand why she could not simply claim Toyama in the same way. Then came the incident where Toyama had actually eaten her. The memory still terrified her. As Toyama listened, he quietly thought that if his own life had unfolded differently, he might have become someone very similar to her. Gita then admitted that perhaps she had been doing everything wrong. Maybe there was simply something wrong with her. Hearing that, Toyama remembered the advice of people he admired and thought about what they would have done in such a situation. He gently told Gita that she was not sick at all. Wanting to get along with someone was a perfectly normal and natural desire. Then Toyama decided to introduce himself properly. He explained that his hobbies included reading, gaming, camping, fishing, cooking for himself, and many other simple activities. His dream was to someday build a house beside a peaceful lakeside. As he spoke, he slowly extended his hand toward her. The gesture caught Gita completely by surprise. Toyama explained that he was introducing himself not because Gramps had told him to do so, but because he had chosen to do it himself. He clarified that he was not trying to form some special bond or agree to any marriage-related nonsense. He simply wanted to become her friend. Toyama felt incredibly embarrassed. He looked away as he cautiously extended his hand toward Gita for a handshake. Even while doing so, he could not stop thinking about how awkward the situation was. A part of him worried that she might find the gesture disgusting. If she did, he felt as though he would die from embarrassment on the spot. Gita seemed as though she wanted to giggle and tease him, but Toyama quickly realized that she was not disgusted at all. After a brief silence, Toyama told her his name once again and asked who she was. The question left Gita confused. Toyama explained that he had already introduced himself, which meant it was now her turn. He pointed out that he had never properly heard her name directly from her. According to him, it was impossible to become friends with someone who refused to even say their own name. Gita was stunned. She remarked that a male was asking for her name and wondered whether that was some kind of marriage proposal. Toyama was immediately horrified by the idea and told her to stop thinking that way. He argued that if simply asking for someone's name counted as a proposal, then every human in the world would already be married. It was nothing more than basic communication. Gita seemed genuinely surprised by this explanation and asked whether he was serious. Toyama confirmed that he was. He told her that she could address him however she liked and then asked once more what her name was. After hesitating for a moment, Gita slowly reached out and accepted his offered handshake. As their hands met, she finally introduced herself properly. Toyama smiled and complimented her, saying that she had a beautiful name. Then, with complete sincerity, he declared that from that moment onward, the two of them were friends. She wondered whether Toyama considered her a friend. Toyama stepped back and apologized for acting strangely, but she assured him that everything was fine. Toyama then remarked that since they were friends now, he wondered if he could call her by her name. At first, she felt somewhat embarrassed, but eventually agreed. Only a select few people were allowed to address her by name. Toyama thought that nicknames such as Armor, Bastard, and Hoarding Dragon were inappropriate. He then recalled his school days when he had been a crybaby and eventually came up with the nickname Draco. Toyama explained that a nickname was something used by friends, and since he had never had any friends before, this was his first experience. She wondered if she was truly his first friend and told him that it was perfectly fine for him to call her Draco. Toyama was shocked that she actually liked the nickname. Meanwhile, she found herself wondering what kind of bond existed between them beyond marriage. She even began to imagine that Toyama might propose to her soon. Toyama noticed that she seemed to be overheating and wondered why she was acting that way. Later, while they were resting and drinking tea, Toyama commented that he had nearly been boiled alive. Gramps remarked that it was the first thermal overload he had witnessed since her childhood. Alice commented that she had behaved like a young dragon. As an apology, they prepared a feast and encouraged Toyama to eat as much as he wanted, since it was a day of celebration. Toyama hesitated at first, but once he tasted the food, he found it incredibly delicious. Alice explained that everything had been prepared by the head maid, Farhan. Toyama was amazed by the quality of the meat, though he found the sauce especially impressive. As he analyzed the ingredients used in its preparation, Alice apologized and admitted that she did not know the recipe. Farhan commented that Toyama's palate was remarkably refined. Toyama realized that the mansion staff had only evaluated the ingredients, and his observations made them very happy. Farhan was pleased that the dishes suited his taste and explained that the pepper used in the meal was extremely rare and could only be cultivated in a limited region of the kingdom. Toyama was shocked to learn how expensive it was. Farhan agreed and explained that a week's worth of that pepper for the embassy could cost enough to build a house. Limited production was one reason for its price, but merchants had also reported that monsters frequently attacked trade ships. Since monsters appeared outside the tower as well, the situation seemed typical. Toyama was impressed by how amazing the food was and thought that the wine was equally extraordinary. While he could tolerate poor baths and toilets, he could not tolerate bad food. Gramps jokingly remarked that Toyama sounded like a well-educated noble and wondered where he had originally come from. Toyama considered whether mentioning another world would be taboo. He wondered if there existed rituals capable of summoning people from different worlds. Alice was surprised by the question, and Gramps explained that according to the guild's report, Toyama had suffered a head injury while fighting adventurers before becoming an adventure slave. Farhan expressed her condolences and remarked that Toyama had clearly endured many hardships. Secretly, she thought that his situation resembled the classic story of someone from another world. Toyama realized that if he was not careful, people would begin to think he was insane. Alice then stated that the most important matter was Toyama's future plans and asked whether he had anywhere to go. Toyama replied that there was someone he needed to find and asked if they still possessed any of his belongings. Gramps produced 2 lockets. Toyama immediately recognized them as the return seal and the necklace he had taken from Alice after killing her. Feeling guilty, he apologized for taking them. Alice replied that it did not matter because both items rightfully belonged to him and were meant to be his reward. Toyama then asked her to explain how they had managed to leave the tower. He mentioned the oddly formal woman who had done something suspicious before he suddenly found himself at the guild. He added that the woman had claimed she would erase his memories, yet he remembered everything clearly. Alice appeared confused. Toyama jokingly told her not to say things like that because it only made the situation sadder. Alice responded that meeting Toyama again and becoming friends with him was something that genuinely mattered to her. As her tail began wagging rapidly, Lazar told her to calm down. Afterward, Alice realized that Toyama wanted to meet Lazardi. Toyama confirmed that he had matters to discuss with Lazar and wondered whether he was currently in the city. Alice revealed that she had also been searching for Lazar. However, once the High Priest's prophecy identified that particular day, the search had become unnecessary, and the organization had stopped looking for him. Toyama wondered if that was because she had been searching for him personally. Alice admitted that she had used the resources and influence of the Dragon Embassy to search for Lazar, but even with those capabilities, they had been unable to locate him. She explained that this could mean he was either dead or had been transported elsewhere. She then warned Toyama not to underestimate her, declaring that a dragon's word was absolute truth and law. According to Alice, Lazar had undoubtedly been sent back to Adventurer's City, whether dead or alive. Even the discovery of a body would have served as evidence, yet no such report had ever surfaced. This meant that Lazar had somehow escaped all tracking efforts and was still hiding somewhere. She concluded that finding him would not be easy. Suddenly, a screen appeared in front of Toyama displaying a side quest that required him to hunt the back alley lizard. Upon seeing it, Toyama thought that this might finally provide a lead that would help him. Afterward, Toyama noticed something flying across the sky. He remarked that it looked wonderful and thanked Alice and the others for their hospitality, including the bath and the excellent food. Alice wondered if Toyama was already preparing to leave. Toyama asked her not to make such a gloomy face and assured her that if things ever became difficult, he would come back and ask for her help. He added that he would not lie, especially not to a friend. Hearing that made Alice happy, and she replied that she would gladly respect his wishes. Toyama then asked for his clothes to be returned, explaining that he could hardly go out dressed as he currently was. Alice immediately called for Gramps, who agreed to help. Meanwhile, Farron brought a new set of clothes and explained that they had originally belonged to a survivor from a Rank 2 party. Technically, they had been purchased from someone investigating promotion-related matters. Alice added that the clothes had initially been collected as clues in the search for Toyama, but now they rightfully belonged to him. Gramps also remarked that, regardless of their appearance, the material was highly unusual. He understood why craftsmen constantly examined and repainted it for inspection. Alice firmly stated that there was no way she would allow the dwarves to tamper with her collection. Following her orders, Farron instantly changed Toyama's clothes, astonishing everyone present. Farron then commented that Toyama naturally stood out wherever he went, so they had also prepared a robe for him. Alice remarked that the robe suited Toyama perfectly and asked him to consider it a gift. She admitted that seeing him wear it would make her happy. In response, Toyama called her by her real name and knelt before her in gratitude. He sincerely thanked her for everything she had done for him and explained that repaying the kindness of good people was one of his personal desires. Alice blushed, feeling unexpectedly happy after receiving such heartfelt thanks. Since they were now friends, she promised that she would always help him whenever he needed support. Toyama replied that if she ever found herself in trouble, he would come to support her as well. Alice then said that she would continue writing letters and asked him to inform her once he reached his destination safely. Toyama agreed. At that moment, both Gramps and Farron became emotional as they realized Toyama was about to depart. Alice instructed Gramps to escort Toyama and notify both Adventurer City and the Empire of the situation. Gramps agreed and promised that he would ensure all searches and investigations regarding the Black Turtle slave operation would be halted. Toyama once again remarked that he owed Alice more than he could ever repay. Alice secretly wondered if he might have fallen for her. Sensing her thoughts, Toyama teasingly told her to stop thinking such nonsense. Just then, Farron appeared and jokingly commented that the marriage arrangements were already settled. Alice then entrusted Toyama's care to Bernal. Soon after, she began wondering how much money Toyama had for his journey and suggested that 50 platinum coins should be sufficient. Toyama quietly asked Gramps what such an amount could actually buy. Gramps replied that it was enough to build a house in the noble district. Toyama was stunned by the answer while Alice innocently wondered if the amount was still insufficient. However, Toyama quickly replied that it was far too much and realized once again that Alice's sense of money was completely unreliable. Suddenly, Toyama noticed a floating arrow above Alice's head. Confused, he focused on it and soon discovered that it represented a new main quest: kill the hoarding dragon. Toyama was utterly shocked by the absurd objective. Without hesitation, he grabbed the arrow, forced it to the ground, and crushed it beneath his foot. Instantly, the main quest was discarded, and the entire quest line collapsed. Toyama and Gramps leaving together. As they walked, Toyama looked at Gramps' face and remarked that he seemed unusually happy. Gramps replied that it was the first time he had ever seen Alice behave that way. Hearing that, Toyama thought that Alice really needed to spend more time resting and taking care of herself. His thoughts drifted back to a moment earlier. Toyama had asked Alice to wait for a moment, after which she stepped closer and asked if he was truly all right. She explained that she understood he only needed some time to calm down, but she wondered whether they would be able to see each other again soon. Toyama agreed and asked her to lend him her hand. When she did, he linked their pinky fingers together and made a promise. He admitted that he did not know exactly when they would meet again, but he promised that he would write letters to her and that he had no plans to leave the city anytime soon. Alice was surprised and reminded him that a promise made to a dragon was sacred and must never be broken. Toyama assured her that he would never break a promise made to a friend. He added that the next time they met, it would not be as strangers or acquaintances, but as true friends. Alice happily agreed. The scene then returned to the present. Gramps wondered whether Toyama was truly certain that 50 copper coins would be enough for Alice's peace of mind. Toyama replied that it was already more than sufficient. Even when Alice had worried about his travel expenses, he had calculated that the amount was enough to pay for 3 days at a cheap inn. The expression on her face at the time had been so amusing that it still made him laugh. Eventually, the two continued their journey. Gramps explained that they would soon arrive at Adventurer City Agatra, one of the most important locations in the nation alongside the imperial capital. He described it as a heavily fortified city that had been constructed by a legendary party during the early days of the Third Civilization's Great War, making it even older than the Empire itself. Gramps further explained that the city's prosperity came from its massive defensive walls and abundant water supply. One branch of the Great Nada River flowed directly through the heart of the city, providing both protection and resources. As they traveled, Toyama noticed a gigantic structure in the distance and wondered if it was the tower. Gramps confirmed that it was indeed the tower, the last great land of mystery within the human realm and the object of humanity's endless fascination. It was known as the Tower of Heroyt. Toyama stared upward but was unable to see its summit. Gramps explained that, according to the Magic Academy, the tower was somehow collapsed and connected to a distant place, unlike anything in their world. Neither humans nor dragons fully understood its true nature, which was why its complete form could never be observed from the outside. The tower seemed to extend into somewhere far away, beyond the boundaries of their world. Toyama recalled having once spoken about such mysteries, saying that the spirit of adventure and romance would never truly end. Curious, he asked what existed at the very top of the tower. Gramps replied that according to the legends of the Angel Church, the summit of the tower contained everything